Hey everyone, welcome back to the DTV Connoisseur podcast. As always, this is Matt, and now we'll get started with the episode in just a minute here. We're going to have Will from Exploding Helicopter on as we talk about two films from Olga Kurylenko. First one is going to be High Heat, which also stars Don Johnson, and the second one will be The Courier, which also stars Gary Oldman and Dermot Mulroney. So we'll get into those in just a bit. As far as the rest of the podcast goes, next week we'll be doing going back to our DTVC extra look at the Fast and Furious franchise. We're looking at Fate of the Furious and Hobbs and Shaw, right? The Hobbs and Shaw film. So this is the one series I've been having the most trouble talking about what movies I'll be talking about this series. I'm like, Fate of the Furious, is it, Hobbs and Shaw? Is it Furious 7? It's like, because they use a different terminology for every one of them. So it's like, I really have to practice. But anyways, yeah, we'll be getting into Fate of the Furious and Hobbs and Shaw next week. Week after that, Ty from Comeuppance will be back on as we will be looking at Gunfight at Rio Bravo, Alexander Nevsky film. Get that confused with Taken at Rio Bravo, but Gunfight at Rio Bravo we'll be talking about. Kind of going back to the Nevsky well, giving him a second shot after we had the dubbed Red Prophecies. And then the other movie that we'll be looking at is Paradise City, the Travolta Bruce Willis film. And then the week after that, we'll be finishing up the Fast and Furious saga or franchise look, where we'll be looking at Fast 9 and Fast X, which I did watch Fast X in the theater, so I don't want to step on that conversation too much, because I also, when Ty comes on, I talk a little bit about my theater going experience, but it was an interesting experience. I went to an AMC dine-in, so I had never been to one of those before. These nice, like, plush recliner kind of seats where I was, like, pushing buttons to recline my seat back and everything. I had like a cup holder. It was a very unique experience. But yeah, anyway, so I did get to see Fast X in the theater, and we will be wrapping up that series, in I guess a few weeks time. And yeah, we'll kind of get back into that. So anyway, that is the podcast. In terms of the site, this Saturday we've got Made Men. So kind of going back to Will from Exploding Helicopter, previous episode that he was on, Two Non-Bonds, we talked about two direct-to-video movies that had James Bond, or people who played James Bond starring in them, and one of them was Made Men, which had Timothy Dalton in it. So I'll be finally covering that one for the site. And then after that is our 1200th post, and I was trying to figure out what to post for that. I had in mind that I might do one of the new Dolph movies that's out now. And so with Xfinity, they do this deal with our rewards program where each weekend you can get $1 rental if the rental price is up to $5.99. So anything under $5.99, you can get one of those for $1 each weekend. And so usually new releases are $5.99. So I'm thinking, okay, I'll watch one of these Dolph movies with the special $1 rental thing. I go and look, and they've upped the price to now $7.99. So the Dolph movies, the two new Dolph movies, are $7.99. So either I pay $8 or I don't watch them because they don't qualify for the $1 rental. So I was like, okay, I had that 4 Got 10 as a placeholder, and I didn't really like that for a 1200th post. Yes, we need to get, kind of finishing up these Dolph movies at some point. So I was thinking of what a good 1200th post could be for me. And there's a movie called Beach Fever that's on YouTube. It was a Kato Kaelin film from the 90s. And I have some really good stories around it because it was one that I tried to tape off of USA Up All Night. I had it set to record at like 3 a.m. and I came out in the living room because I'll get into it more in the post. It's sort of the machinations of my household of how I had to go about recording movies and all of that back then. 4:30 in the morning, I come out to see how it's taping, and my dad had changed the channel and was watching Headline News. And so if you remember at that time, Headline News was like a half-hour news recap every half hour. Kind of one of those things where it would just like rotate the same show every half hour like that. And he would just have it on and watch it. So yeah, I'll kind of get into that. So I thought maybe a special connection kind of thing, a movie of wanting to always kind of get. And, now that we live in this modern environment where pretty much everything's available, I thought kind of a fun one that we could maybe, I could tell some stories around and stuff like that. So look out for that in a couple of weeks. And then I think we'll probably do 4 Got 10 the week after that, finally get 4 Got 10 out of the way there. And who knows about those two new Dolph films. So if, at some point, if Xfinity brings the price down on them, or maybe I splurge and do the $6 ones. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens there. But anyway, yeah, why don't we get into the podcast here? So we'll start by having John Cross of After Movie Diner and Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures play us in with the theme song here.
we are back with the Direct Video Connoisseur podcast, and I am joined by a very special guest here. I've got Will from Exploding Helicopter. Welcome back, Will.
Oh, thanks for having me back on, Matt. It is always a privilege and a pleasure to guest on the DTV Connoisseur.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that. There is a bit of a connection between your last visit when we talked about the title of the episode was Two Non-Bonds, where we talked about two direct-to-video movies that had former James Bond starring in them, and the woman that we're going to be spotlighting today, Olga Kurylenko, actually was in a James Bond movie. So there's a little bit of a connection there.
Well, I think you could even argue there's a big connection, because I would argue that in fact she actually owes her entire DTV action career to that appearance in Quantum of Solace. But yeah, we can get into that later if you fancy.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. Yeah, it's funny. I wanted to try to watch before we got to the episode. I wanted to watch the Black Widow movie that came out that she was in. You know, that because she played the Taskmaster in that, who's like kind of a classic baddie. And so I was like, oh, I want to watch that one. It was, so I've seen Quantum of Solace, and I was like, let me see what this other one is. I just never got to it. There's something about these Marvel movies that they feel like I don't know, endeavors to get through. And so it's like this idea of like, boy, I've got this, like I don't know. I mean, the James Bond movie is only like maybe like 20 minutes short or something like that. But it just felt like, I don't know. Maybe I think it's probably just me, but that's just kind of how I feel with the Marvel movies.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar sort of place with the Marvel movies. If you love them, I'm not knocking you. I'm glad you have them in your life. Feel free to enjoy them as much as you want. For me, I'm kind of over them. There's just, I haven't got the energy, or frankly the time or inclination to try and keep up with them. All of the interwoven storylines that there are, I have some issues with them. They have all started to feel a bit sort of cookie cutter and a bit samey. So yeah, I have seen Black Widow though. I have seen that movie, and yes, Olga Kurylenko does turn up in that right at the end as a kind of like as the sort of the nemesis for our hero in that film. But she's actually going to be reprising the role that she plays in Black Widow in the upcoming Marvel movie Thunderbolts. So as a Kurylenko fan, I will be required to venture once more back into the Marvel universe and watch that film.
Yeah, when I looked at her CV and saw that she was playing Taskmaster, someone. I collected the comics in like the late 80s, early 90s, and Taskmaster was one of those villains that would show up from time to time in like an Avengers comic or something like that. A lot of times they used him as a one-off, as like, okay, we've got like a big story arc that's going to go through the summer, and we've got one that we're just wrapping up here in the spring. We need one issue to get out there, so let's just have Captain America fight the Taskmaster or something like that. That was a lot of times how they were used, but the character had like a skull. He was had kind of a skull for a face, but the idea with the Taskmaster, right? I think, and I imagine the movie must have done the same thing. Is that he can do anybody's moves, right? He can do anybody's special powers or whatever, and so. I had seen that the Taskmaster was supposed to be in the Black Widow, and it didn't cross my mind that Olga Kurylenko would be playing that character. But I think that's really great casting there, and so I think it's really cool that they're bringing her back for that.
Well, I have no understanding of the sort of the character outside of what I saw on screen in the film. So yeah, I wasn't expecting to. I just kind of thought, oh yeah, that's a sort of one and done role. I had never imagined that she would actually get to play again in the Marvel sandbox. So yeah, I will. As I say, as a Kurylenko fan, I'm required to go and watch that movie now.
Yeah, I mean that's a good segue because when I was thinking about like what a good topic would be for our podcast, having you on, I think I remembered in the past that you'd posted about being a fan of Kurylenko on Twitter, and I watched White Elephant for a previous podcast episode with Ty from Comeuppance, and as I'm going through Kurylenko's CV, I'm like, why am I not spotlighting her more on the podcast or on my site and all of that? Like how am I missing her so much? And so yeah, I maybe that's a good place to start. It's like why I would be missing her so much. Like what's happening there that I was not, referring to her as one of the best female action stars out there right now.
Yeah, you know what, Matt? I'm not sure I can really, not sure I can really explain it, because I do think she sort of goes a little bit under the radar as, as a lead, as an action movie lead, because I mean, she has done in her CV, she's done all sorts of different films. She's done, serious dramas like Seven Psychopaths, which was well, that's not serious drama; it's a kind of like comedy drama. But I think it's by the guy who kind of did In Bruges.
Yeah.
She's been in Terrence Malick film, To the Wonder, and she's obviously been in Quantum of Solace. She's done comedies like the Death of Stalin. But actually, if she's done horror films as well. But actually, like, what seems to be her bread and butter increasingly is action movie films. And yeah, it is strange why she doesn't have, say, more of a kind of reputation in that line. Yeah, I can't answer it, Matt. It's a good question.
Yeah, because just as looking at her CV, like I kind of, for me, when it comes to female action stars, I have my top tier is like, Pam Grier, Cynthia Rothrock, and Michelle Yeoh. Those are the three that I kind of hold as like, okay, those are the ones that are real, like the pioneers and have the huge CVs. And then in my second tier, I think of like Zoe Saldana, Michelle Rodriguez, Mila Jovovich, that group there. And I feel like that's almost where Kurylenko is headed. And like you said, like we're not really talking about it that way, that we don't really think of like, oh yeah, that second tier there is kind of still a big tier when you think of those names.
Well, you know what? A thought has just cropped up into my mind actually as to why we don't think of her in that way, and I wonder if it is because she's got a lot of like action movie credits on her CV, but usually she's playing a supporting character. So, some of the bigger films that she's been in, things like Hitman, Max Payne, she's a supporting character to the leads in those movies, Timothy Oliphant and I think it's a Wahlberg in Max Payne, I think.
Right.
And something like The November Man, which again, that was a DTV film, but Pierce Brosnan is the main character. Like Oblivion, obviously that was a big theatrically released movie, but that's a Tom Cruise film. And so she's often playing these type of a supporting character, a mysterious assassin, something along those lines. Something like Johnny English Strikes Again, comedy role. She plays that sort of deadly mysterious killer type role in there, a bit of a send up of the genre. So I think the fact that she's not leading those films in a way that, say, Mila Jovovich is, she had the Resident Evil franchise, and she's been in things like Monster Hunter, where big studio movies, big budgets, and where she is demonstrably the lead character. I think the films where the bigger action films Kurylenko's been in, she's often a supporting player, and the times where she does get to play the lead character it's they're only in these sort of DTV films. So I think that's probably why we have her sort of on that second tier, and perhaps why she doesn't sort of readily come to mind when you think of like, top female action stars.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because when I was thinking about like what movies we could do, because I knew, you'd said, okay, High Heat is one I want to cover for this episode, but then we were trying to figure out what the second one was, and I was like, well, I don't want to do any that we've already done on the podcast, and of course I knew White Elephant because that was a very recent one, but then I realized, like you said, The November Man was one that I did back in sort of the earlier iteration of the podcast that I used to do with Jamie in the like 2014, 2015, and then also it was that one, and why am I drawing a blank on the name of it? Erased with Aaron Eckhart. So, and again, it was like you said, like I remembered those movies as being an Aaron Eckhart or a Pierce Brosnan movie that we covered on the site, and didn't really think of it as, oh, that's right, yeah, those were Olga Kurylenko films. Another one that I covered on the site was Centurion. Because that was kind of because I wanted to get some Michael Fassbender. I thought there's really not going to be many opportunities for me to get Michael Fassbender on the site, and I was like, all right, that one didn't make enough money. Let's cover that one. Again, it was a Kurylenko film, but I was doing it for the sake of Michael Fassbender.
Yeah, and you probably won't have a chance to do Michael Fassbender until he gets old and gets divorced, and he, needs to make some quick cash.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I saw there's a recent documentary came out about Randall Emmett, who it might be that maybe things are kind of coming to an end for him soon here. But yeah, Ty and I always joke about him coming to sort of washed up actors or actors who need the money, you know, with this scroll that like they sign away their lives to do multiple pictures with him. And so yeah, Randall Emmett's gonna
I
be
imagine he just sort of scans the sort of court reports for divorce filings
exactly.
because okay.
Yeah,
I'll give him a ring.
Yeah, I know he's got alimony payments, and now he's also going to have a new girlfriend that he's going to have to pay for as well. This is perfect. Yeah. Yeah, I think I don't want to talk out of school, and of course I don't know that our podcast has enough of a reach that we could be spreading drama or that people will be like quoting it. But I think that was a big reason why Dolph had like kind of that resurgence of DTV stuff was that he got a divorce but then had a new girlfriend, and it was like, okay, yeah, I got to start doing some roles, and that's when you started seeing some of those bad ones in the 2010s that he did.
Matt, I mean, this is for a big Dolph fan as you to be casting those types of aspersions.
I know.
I mean, you should tell yourself off for that, I think.
Yes, yeah, that I know exactly. I know.
It's blasphemy.
Exactly. Our big star, the guy who moves the needle here so much here on the podcast. And yeah, so probably one of the bigger reasons why the site even like had the kind of readership that it had, because people wanted to find out about Dolph movies. And so yeah, though to be fair, the most popular Dolph film on the site, the one that got the most views, it was the Joshua Tree or Army of One, and that was because character played by Kristen Alfonso, who's a soap actress here in the U.S. Her character gets nude in one of the scenes, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have expected her to be nude, because usually that type of actress isn't, she's not going to do that in a role." And sure enough, it was a body double. But the fact that I had the words Kristen Alfonso and nude in the same sentence was enough to make that, like, when I would look up, like, why is that post getting so much? And then you look in the Google Analytics, it was, the search thread was Kristen Alfonso nude and just blew it up. So yeah, so as great as I say Dolph was for the site, it turns out that actually sometimes it's just, tip for all you new bloggers out there, just throw in some terms with, the famous actress in nude, even if they never get naked, and that might be enough to get you some views.
Yeah, I had that with the movie Stealth, which features Jamie Foxx and Jessica Biel, and in a scene where she gets gets fresh in a waterfall wearing nothing but a bikini, and little did I know that referring to that and including a picture of that scene in my review would cause it to generate quite so much traffic.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's like you never think of those kinds of things. And granted, it is kind of a crass, but it's like after the fact, it's like, should I just be talking about every actress in the movie being naked? It's like do I need to get that much traffic to the site? But yeah, it is funny how that is. Like you just you never know what's going to be, but it tends to be those kinds of things. Excellent. Well, maybe this is a good segue into talking about Kurylenko, because I think that's one of the things, right, with big female action stars, is that I think one of the things about these two movies that we're going to be talking about here. So the two films that we're talking about are going to be High Heat and which is the newest one that she has out with Don Johnson. I think it's the newest one. It's if it's not, it's very close to one of her newest ones. But then another one is going to be 2019's The Courier, which also has Gary Oldman and Dermot Mulroney. And I think one of the keys, I think, when you have a female action star is that it kind of get rid of some of the tropes that are inherent in action films, right? Like the damsel in distress, some of those elements there. I think, again, with these movies, she is sort of the apex action hero in the film and kind of takes care of business, which I think is important. I think in someone's career, like I think that was important. I think to Cynthia Rothrock's career, that she didn't have roles like that. I think some of the other big names we think of, like that they have those kinds of. They're fully an action hero in the episode or in the movie.
I couldn't agree with you more, Matt. Like as somebody who's been watching action films now for, oh my goodness, I mean, getting close to 40 years.
Right.
As soon as you, I mean, it's a male dominated genre. So as soon as you put a woman in the lead role, it invariably, well, immediately makes it feel like fresher, a little bit different. As you say, it kind of dispenses with quite a lot of those sort of tropes. So yeah, I mean, whilst we have had, people like Cynthia Rothrock been around for decades, the fact is they're in a minority. So whenever you come up to a kind of female-led action film, it invariably feels a bit fresher. And yeah, I think it adds some interesting dynamics. It gets rid of some of the cliches, and also the fact that for me, it's always interesting when you see like a woman in that role. I mean, you can, because I guess they don't have some of the physical advantages that men have. Just men and women are built differently. Typically, they're smaller. They're not as heavy. So, there's immediately there's an air of vulnerability to the character, which you don't always have, say, with some big muscle-bound beefcake, a la Stallone or Schwarzenegger, where there's a sort of air of invincibility. Well, of course they're going to come out of this situation because look at the size of him. Whereas you see sort of Olga Kurylenko staring down a bathroom full of heavies. Well, she might not come out of this alive, and so that then makes, for me anyway, that scene immediately more interesting because there are some stakes, there's some jeopardy. Going back to the Marvel movies, those characters are like, they're like bulletproof. There's no jeopardy in those action scenes because that they're going to come out of them unharmed. They can just do these, they can just fly into a cliff face, and they'll just sort of like rub their head and straighten their hair, and they'll be off again. And so yeah, I think for me, I think whenever you see a woman in an action film, you get rid of some of those cliches, and it creates a bit of tension for the sort of reasons I've outlined.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned about that, like kind of like the big muscle bound guys, like look at the Schwarzenegger in the '80s, right? That was like kind of a big thing where it was just like, like let's just see what we can put him in and have him, like when you think of Commando, right? Like there's really no peril that he's in Commando. It seems like, right? Like he's just which and it's still a really fun movie, but you make a great point that it's fun just because it's Schwarzenegger doing what he does, but like what with Kurylenko here, it's like you said, like there's almost a sense of how is she going to get out of this, and I think like the Marvel comparison is a great one because the Marvel ones, it feels like the peril happens because it's almost like that's the point in the movie where the peril is supposed to happen, right? Like, okay,
Yep.
Okay, here's, I don't know what scriptwriter 101 or something like that, the 5-act movie 101, where it's like, this is the point where all hope is supposed to be lost for our hero, or that kind of thing. And yes, I think especially the Courier that we'll be talking about probably has some similar beats to that. But when you have someone like Kurylenko, who, one, she's great at selling it as an actress as well. But two, there is that sense of like, okay, how is she going to get out of this situation? Because it's not as simple as just like, like what is she going to find in her surroundings maybe to make it work or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that for me is just a much more interesting movie. I mean, I love Commando, but I guess you could say, Commando was kind of at the dawn of those 80s action movies, and so having a completely sort of invulnerable bulletproof hero was fine at that time. But after watching 40 years of action movies, you've got to find some new twists on things. So you got to kind of, you can't keep playing the same riffs over and over again. So I think it's much more interesting, I think, when you have a hero or protagonist who it has some elements of vulnerability. I mean, I've been dissing sort of Marvel and superhero movies. One that I really, really enjoyed, and I think is a great film, was Logan. And why did that work for me? It's because he's getting old and his powers are kind of fading. So again, there's some jeopardy. It's like, how's he going to get through the kind of the situations that he finds in, because he's kind of getting slowly weaker and weaker, and it just frustrates me. I think when I see these kind of big superhero blockbuster movies come out, and it's just like, well, we know they're all getting through to the end of this movie largely unharmed, so like where's the where's the fun and enjoyment in that?
Yeah, no, I agree, because that's a great point, because I think, again, going back to sort of the comics, in the early 90s that I remember reading, like there was a lot of storylines that they would do with Wolverine, not so much like that he was getting older and his powers were fading, but just like these sort of like more human elements to him, and his demons and things that he was going through, that they would kind of explore that a little more with him than they would, like, say, Spider-Man or Captain America or somebody like that. There was almost like a sense that, like, you could go different places with Wolverine, that you couldn't. But another one that I think of, like, that, female driven, is Captain Marvel, where they sort of take the tropes that are based in like male dominated movies, and kind of go with these, also some of the societal norms that are expected of women, things like, oh, you shouldn't be too forward, you shouldn't be, you've got to sublimate parts of you to sort of get by, and things like that. They use those as the elements that are kind of like those standard, points of peril or whatever. So it's like, the peril she's in is not that she, that all hope is lost, because, she needs someone to rescue her. It's all hope is lost because she's not using her powers to her full extent, because she's sublimating them, and it's like, just be who you are. And then that scene at the end with why am I totally drawing a blank on that, on his name, the actor that was
Samuel L.
playing.
Jackson?
No,
Who?
the one who played the baddie. How do
Oh,
English actor? Why, I can't believe, because I should.
I have seen that, but I can't remember that movie
Yeah, because the
in
thing
any
is,
detail.
yeah, because I should know his name, because he was the one that Chris Rock was making fun of at the Video Movie Awards, yeah, because he won so many awards. And I'm just like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Jude Law. Like, how did I miss Jude Law? Like, because remember, I don't know if you remember that the MTV, I think it was the MTV Movie or something like that, where Chris Rock was hosting, and he was like, who the hell is Jude Law? Because he was like, nominated in every category. He was doing a ton of movies, and then Sean Penn got up and, I know who Jude Law is. He's like one of our greatest actors. It's like, didn't want to take the joke or whatever. So yeah, so not a name I should have forgotten. But anyway, so there's that scene where he's like, don't you want to see if you can beat me without your powers? And she just, like, kind of smashes him across the desert, and is like, I don't have anything to prove to you, And it's so, like, yeah, I think you're right. Like, sometimes with those Marvel movies, they can do some good things if they're not sort of like kind of all just in those, or I don't know. Like, it's interesting because Logan's not so much a Marvel movie in the sense that we think of, right? Because it's those Fox movies were a little bit, they did some different things than, like, you talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where everything had to be interwoven, right? And it was just like, these big huge storylines that go on forever. That one was a little bit different there, but yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one of the other things, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going a bit long here on this, but I was looking at the Andy Sidaris things and saying how kind of almost revolutionary it was that he was using Donna Spear, and that, like, when you think of like women helming a franchise, right? Like, really the only other franchise that went as long as her helming the Andy Sidaris films, that she does essentially, like, Hard Ticket to Hawaii, which I know, I think you posted on your Twitter recently. I think that's like the last one that was helmed by an Abilene who couldn't shoot straight, or no, I guess there's a couple more that had a different Abilene who couldn't shoot straight. But then I think it's after the third one that Sidaris decides to move the series over to Donna Spear, and she's like helms like 5 of those movies. And I realized, I was like, other than Mila Jovovich with the Resident Evil movies, like, there really isn't a woman helming an action franchise for that many films like that. And so it is like one of those things where you just, like, when you look at the list of names, I was like, well, Donna Spear, you got to put her up there. And then again, it's just me forgetting Olga Kurylenko. But it does show you that, like, it's still a space that needs some growing, for sure. That we need to have more of this kind of thing.
Well, there's one other actress that I think who perhaps exists in that sort of space, and probably definitely at the second tier, is maybe somebody like Naomi Rapace.
Right.
She's got quite a few now, sort of action type credits, often in the sort of DTV sort of streaming field. So in sort of recent years, she did I think it's called Close or Closer. And then she did a strange film, a sort of action movie on ice skates called Black Crab, I think, if I remember the title, which is a Netflix movie. It's actually quite a decent watch, but it's yeah, definitely the first sort of action movie on ice skates that I've ever seen.
That's a name that I've been meaning. She's one, again, kind of after Kurylenko now. That another name that I was like, boy, I've got to start thinking about looking into more of her stuff, because I think I knew about, like, those I don't know what the girl with the dragon tattoo series that she was doing.
Mm.
But yeah, you're right. Like she's kind of another one who's sort of like she's pivoted a bit now that like to doing more of these direct to video kinds of things. That yeah, I'm definitely kind of curious to see more of
Actually,
what
another name has floated into my mind because there, especially I'm keen to jump in and mention it because there's probably some listener out there screaming at their sort of headphones at the fact that we haven't mentioned their name. Is that obviously we had there was a period of time where Gina Carano did seem to be sort of carving out that
Right.
particular niche, but obviously that was prior to her blowing up her own career with with some
Yeah.
unfortunate comments and postings.
I know, because that was something I was thinking about. Because I was, doing these Fast and Furious movies as kind of like the off, fortnight that I'm not doing the normal podcast like what we're on here. And I was watching her in Fast and Furious 6, and it was like between that and then of course obviously The Mandalorian. It's like it's amazing how quickly she kind of threw away, it's like and people say like, oh, well, there's a double standard because Mel Gibson is still able to make films, but it's like when you watch Mel Gibson in a direct to video movie, you realize like he is so far beyond the material that's in that
Yeah.
movie that he is still in a way it's still a cancellation. So because he should be doing these Marvel movies that we're talking about, right? He should be the villain in these films or whatever. He should be a major piece or major character in these movies, and he's not because they can't touch him. I mean the things that he's on record for having said are just so horrible. But yeah, the Gina Carano one's interesting because yes, of course, the things that she said online were not great. But then also she kind of doubled down on it, right? Like so then she's doing like a movie that's like I think it's like the Daily Wire, some conservative like media outlet here in the U.S. They're making a movie about Hunter Biden's laptop or something like that, and she's starring in it. So it's like I think she could have sort of made her apologies, said okay, I was dumb for doing this, kind of made her Twitter something that like I don't know. Made her Twitter something that's a little bit more like I'm just not going to post anything that's not just like here's what I'm doing for work or here's this charity event that I'm attending. And she probably could have stayed down, done a few Randall Emmett films. I'm sure he would have been showing up with his scroll to get her in a few things. But she could have rehabilitated it, and I think Disney would have wanted her back in The Mandalorian because she was a really good piece for that. But I think also action films. I think people wanted her in these movies because I don't think they were like they tried to do it with now I'm drawing another blank here with names here, but there's the other MMA star that they were trying to sort of put into films, but she didn't really have the it factor that Carano had, and I think people would have wanted her in things, but she just I think she pivoted too quickly. I think she looked at being canceled, and I think I don't know, we think of this whole thing of being canceled as like like that's it. When somebody's canceled, they're all done. But I think Mel Gibson's an obvious example because of the stuff that he's said and done, and he's not full. He can still work. But also, I mean, there are a lot of names of people that kind of just sort of get back into working. I think if she hadn't pivoted so much into like I'm just going to only do this kind of stuff now. It's possible we could have her back, and yeah, it is kind of a shame. The name I was thinking was Ronda Rousey. That's the one who just
Yeah.
Yeah, she just doesn't work on screen like
Yeah.
you'd think she should. Whereas Carano could. So yeah, I agree with you there about Carano. Carano was one that was headed in that direction, and by now I would say she would be helming. Like I think she would be getting the big parts. Like I wouldn't even be surprised if they maybe did like a Mandalorian spinoff with her had she just sort of not compared COVID restrictions to Nazi Germany. Not made fun of people's. I think I think you're right. She would be there right now.
Yeah, I think comparing Carano and Gibson, Gibson was a much bigger star, and so he's, as you say, he's taken a massive hit in his career, but he had more, credit in the bank is not quite the right word, but whereas Carano wasn't at that level, and so that's why she's kind of sort of disappeared off the face of the earth. And as you say, the way in which she has kind of doubled down on it didn't help matters whatsoever. So yeah, I think there could have been a way back for her, but she's made her bed, so she's lying in it now.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I feel like, again, I don't think there's any celebrities that listen to this podcast, but I do feel like this is a good moment for a PSA about that. Like I recently, because I'm a baseball fan, there's a podcaster here in the US who's kind of popular, he's a media personality who covers baseball. And I guess he was talking about a baseball player. Not he got blocked by a baseball player who his career is kind of faltering a bit and, wasn't doing as well. And another player came to his defense in Twitter saying like, there's no such thing as a bad, there's no such thing as a baseball player who sucks. If you make it to the major leagues, you have to be good. And it was kind of like a back and forth thing. And I was saying to my wife, like how, like if I was the owner of a baseball team, or if I was like the general manager or whoever running the team or whatever the team was, I'd tell all of my players, like if you're on Twitter, you don't need to be getting into a back and forth with a podcaster about, whether a player, it's like his job is to say provocative things. Your job is to pitch and it's like you should just be using your Twitter to show like, oh, I'm excited about the game tonight, or everybody come out to see the game, or yeah, I'm going to be going to this hospital to sign baseballs and do pictures with kids that are terminally ill, or whatever. Like somebody's parent says, hey, I'm your biggest fan, and my son who has this terminal illness wants you to hit a home run for him tonight. Good, I'll retweet that and say, yeah, I'm going to hit one for you, Jimmy, or something like that. Like that's what you should be using the Twitter for. And I think. I mean, maybe another great example is Chris Pratt, where he's part of this he's potentially a part of a fundamentalist, Christian religion. And there was an attempt to sort of try to cancel him, I think, based on that, that religion had some problematic issues with it. But he doesn't use his Twitter for anything like that. And so there was really, they couldn't stick anything to him. And then on the other hand, people came to his defense, people that he starred in those films with. I think, just when you're a famous person, use your Twitter. Just keep, Twitter should just be it shouldn't be your mouthpiece for spitting out your opinions, because you're going to get yourself in trouble.
Absolutely. I mean, we live, what's why, if you think back to the sort of, the golden age of Hollywood, it's why the studios spent, so much time and effort carefully managing the the reputations and the public perceptions of all of their stars, because they knew some of them, frankly, if the public actually understood who this person was in real life, they wouldn't like them at all, and we wouldn't be able to open a movie with them starring in it. So we're going to carefully manufacture their entire public persona. So sadly, for many of the actors working today, the studios don't work in those ways, don't have those kind of very unhealthy relationships with the media that sort of allowed that kind of public deception to sort of continue. And obviously with social media now, so there's in some ways there's no stopping these people putting their thoughts and the thoughts out into the public domain. But yeah, I think we just live in an age where I think those kind of Hollywood stars from another era, they kind of there was just as many monsters and unsavory characters then as we appear to have now. But we just we're never in a position to understand just who those people were, because there was a whole industry dedicated to protecting their reputations.
Yeah, exactly. I think what should have happened, and maybe this is how Gina Carano and other stars should think of it, like what we want is 30 years from now, when their career is pretty much done, that there's a tell-all book that says that, maybe Gina Carano had a significant other that she scorned who was threatening to go to the tabloids to talk about her horrible opinions on things. And, he was threatening, and then some private detective showed up and, knocked him around a little bit and convinced him to get rid of the evidence that he had on that. And that's how we find out about these things. We don't find out through their Twitter feeds. So yeah, so all of you stars out there, just save it for the tell-all that happens when your career's done, and you may even have passed away, and it doesn't even affect your career. And then people decide then if they want to cancel you or not, but by then it's already too late.
Perfect. We get the best of both worlds there. We get to know who these people are, but we get to enjoy their careers first.
Exactly. That's perfect. Excellent. Well, I don't know if that's a good transition. Maybe it's a good enough transition for we'll start to talk about our first film here.
It's the transition we're working with.
Exactly, for sure. So and actually there is a little bit of a transition, because I was talking about baseball, and the first one we're talking about was high heat, which is a baseball expression for throwing a fastball up high. But also it's being used in this context for when you're cooking something over high heat, because this is a restaurant film. Yeah, I'll give a quick synopsis here, and then we'll kind of discuss it a little bit. High Heat stars Olga Kurylenko as a French chef who's from Russia, but she likes to cook French cuisine. Her and her husband Don Johnson are opening a restaurant, and the first night looked like it's going really well, but then some mobsters show up and they want to set the place on fire. Turns out the reason for that is that Don Johnson is into these mobsters for $1.2 million, and the way that they're going to get that money back is by burning the place and then collecting the insurance from it. Little do they know is that Kurylenko, being of Russian descent, also has the KGB past, which is there's usually a dovetailing of that. If there's a Russian in a movie, they've worked in the KGB, and that she's no different. And so when the goons show up to set the place on fire, she kills them. And suddenly the place just keeps happening. So Kurylenko knows she's kind of up against it here, so she calls a friend who was a spy at some time. The friend and her husband, who were also spies, they take their sweet time getting to the restaurant, but that's okay because the mobster, played by Diamond Dallas Page, is sending in a few goons at a time, and she keeps picking them off. And then eventually, towards the end, he hires a mercenary group, and there's sort of like a big finale there. So it's a question of whether Kurylenko and Don Johnson will save the restaurant and get out alive. I think that kind of sums it up enough, I think. Will, what did you think of High Heat?
Well, going into this movie, I expected it to be an action film, and actually, after watching it, I think the thing to make people aware of if they're going into this movie is that it's a action comedy, very much an action comedy, and so you need to kind of calibrate your expectations accordingly. So I actually enjoyed High Heat quite a bit. It's a little bit light on action, if I'm honest, and some of the comedy does fall a little flat, but there's actually quite a lot to enjoy here. I think that we get some nice action beats here. There are some good comedic scenes, and it all comes in at a very economical 86 minutes, I think that it is. So yeah, this was a movie that I had fun with.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I think, one, it definitely, think of it as more of an action comedy. And I think, two, if you're going into it fully expecting action, the comedy bits are going to feel like padding to you. So that's probably something to keep in mind, is that once you settle in and realize what this is, then you know that the bits are going to be there. I think there are some of the bits that go on a little bit too long that feel more like padding. I think the friends that are spies, that are a couple, I think their back and forth goes on probably a little bit too long in the car, where they're sort of hashing out marriage issues and things like that. And again, there's like this movie plays a lot in the whole ironic sphere, right? Of like, oh, look at these two spies that are going to go carry out a hit, who are, talking about their marriage, counseling that they're going through and all of that. And so, you see a lot of that in there. But I think, we were talking about the Randall Emmett, produced films. The one thing about this film that I think I agree with you on, or that I feel like makes this thing work, is that there's an earnestness to the production, that it's not just like, let's just put something out there that hits certain beats and just, and I think that helps this film a lot, that, I can appreciate it when I'm watching the movie to be like, okay, this is something that they're really trying to do. This is a project that they're trying to put together that isn't just like, let's put something out there. They want all of this to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a film that is made with the best of intentions, and actually I watched it twice in preparation for this, and the second time I actually probably enjoyed it more than I did on the first viewing, because as I was saying earlier, my expectations were properly calibrated. I was okay, this is more driven by the comedy than it is by the action. And yeah, I actually enjoyed sort of like the different dynamics. I definitely agree. I mean, it's weird. Even in an 86-minute film, there are still some scenes that just go on a little bit too long. Yeah, I definitely agree. Like some of the exchanges between that assassins, that sort of couple who are kind of like paid assassins. Some of they're kind of working through their marriage has gone stale after having a couple of daughters, and they're kind of like working through their marriage issues. And some of their exchanges do go on a little bit long, but actually I actually overall I enjoyed the kind of their arc and what they were adding into the film. I think there were a few exchanges between Don Johnson and Olga Kurylenko that could have been tightened up a little bit. That did feel like they perhaps were allowed to go on because they might have had to get this film up to a particular runtime. I think overall, there is enough good here that makes it all work. And I don't know what you felt. I actually thought that one of the things that really helps this film is the casting, because I think all of the actors in the main parts here. So this is one thing. This is a film of couples. So we've got kind of Don Johnson and Olga Kurylenko as a married couple. We've got this married couple of assassins. There's the father and son mobsters. So it's the kind of classic dynamic where the father has got this kind of useless son that he's sort of trying to hand the business over to, but he can't quite really hand it over to him because he's so much of a fuck up that he keeps screwing things up, and he has to come in and sort it out. And then weirdly, you've got those kind of twin daughters of the of the assassin couple as well. So yeah, you've almost got four couples in here, but all of those roles are really well cast, and they weren't actors necessarily that I was familiar with, but you could see care had been taken in picking those actors, because they do really, really good jobs with kind of like the performances that they give, and like delivering the sort of the kind of comedic, ironic performances that this film is built on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, because there's a sense, right, of this idea that like you said, like couples or like relationships require work at certain points. And it's interesting because you mentioned, the mobster played by Diamond Dallas Page, and his son is played by Ivan Martin, which I think the son looks a little bit old to be being his son.
Yes.
I was a little bit surprised that he was, but maybe that's part of the joke. But the interesting thing there, right, is there's also this character Gary, who's kind of the comedic relief throughout the film, who he's Diamond Dallas Page's masseuse, and he gets sent into the restaurant with another character, and he survives in part because everybody sees him as harmless. But he's, it's Diamond Dallas Page's masseuse, right, as the mobster's masseuse. When he disappears and they think he's dead, it's almost like that's the thing that pushes him over the edge, right? Where he's like, I need to get it, and there's almost like that's almost like I don't say a love triangle element to it, but there's a sort of that third wheel element to that relationship, that like the third person in is causing the problem. And you can almost say the same thing, right, too, about the secret agent couple that having the kids, but in their case it's almost like there's sort of like almost like this staleness of like their relationship. But it's interesting that with Olga, with Anna, Olga Kurylenko's character, and Don Johnson as her husband, that it's like the keeping of secrets, right? That's like the thing that ultimately can kill a marriage. But it's kind of funny the way that they kind of compare the two secrets, almost like I don't think they're the same kind of secrets. Like Olga Kurylenko, yes, being a former KGB agent, it's a big secret to keep from somebody, but it's also, it's not the same as I'm into some mobsters for $1.2 million and they're going to burn down your restaurant that you've, spent your whole life excited to have. It's kind of a different one. Like there's almost kind of a
well, the film makes fun of that. The film makes fun of that, doesn't it? Because they're going over their sort of their secrets, and
right,
sort of Don Johnson is going, well, how much of what you told me is true? And she sort of says, well, I did go to France, and he says after that, but she just I think she says nothing, because like nothing after that was true. So yeah, she's definitely sort of perhaps, yeah. I mean, $1.2 million is a lot of money, but that may have been a bigger whopper.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's a very like you said, it is interesting how they use that dynamic of the couples in the film, and then it's like what you get is this dynamic of these couples sort of like, almost like I never really thought of it like this until you mentioned about the couples piece of it, that there's almost like like one of those like kind of romantic comedies that came out where you'd have a variety of different couples. I think there's a lot of them were like based off certain holidays, like like Valentine's Day or something like that. But you almost have that element, and then interspersed with it are people showing up at the restaurant, and Olga Kurylenko killing them in different sort of macabre ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's well, did she really kill them in macabre ways? I mean, there's a few kind of macabre.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's one macabre
All right,
kill.
there's one that was macabre enough, I guess, maybe for me to
And
color
and I
all of
think
my Oliver killings. Yeah,
and
that's
I
a good
think for
point.
me that was a bit of a beef that I had with this film because like you're making an action comedy where your star is a former KGB person, KGB operative turned chef.
Yeah.
Surely that is a setup for like lots of chef themed kills.
Yes.
And really, we only get one of those well, maybe two. You get the use of the slicer, and then there's a bit of a trap that is concocted using some sort of batter whisk at the end of the film. But I would have expected more chef themed kills.
Yeah, or I mean, the very first kill she does with the cast iron pan, I think there's nothing about it that's special, but I think it would have been kind of funny if she had said, like, oh yeah, I picked these cast iron pans because of, like the weight distribution or something like that, like they're perfect killing, something like that, or if like, Don Johnson's son,
Yes.
like, did you beat them with the, yeah, I picked them out for exactly that reason. Like, yeah, there's more that they could, like, I agree with you. There's more they could have done with that. I think, they show her cutting vegetables, and there's almost like a Chekhov's gun
Yeah.
thing with that we never quite get
The payoff.
the payoff, right? Like we have these stacks of like carrots and celery, which she's sort of making her was it mirepoix or mise en place? I don't know.
You're spot on, Matt. Very
yeah.
good.
Yeah, and so she's putting that together, and yeah, you're right. Like there's that Chekhov's gun piece of it that we never get a payoff for. That like there's a period where she's fighting her friend Mimi and she's throwing knives at her, but and again, it would have been macabre to see some digits being removed potentially, but by the same token, I think, I agree with you there that there wasn't as much use of the restaurant the way that a movie that's based on a restaurant would do, right? It's almost more like when you think of a movie like Sudden Death, right, where Van Damme just happens to be in the kitchen fighting somebody, as opposed to the movies based on the kitchen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was kind of thinking, it reminded me a bit of this section or this film of, Under Siege, where obviously you have, as Steven Seagal as a chef with a very particular set of skills, and. Again, that film, you get to see the knife. You get to see some knife work in that film. He creates a bomb out of using a microwave and some stuff that's lying around in the kitchen. And it's not that much more than what we get in High Heat, but it just kind of feels like a bit more chef themed. And definitely for me a missed opportunity in this one.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think centering it around the restaurant, I think there's more that they could have done in that space that they didn't do. And I think also too, from a budget standpoint, I think some of those things might have actually been cheaper to do. I think if they had done them, like some of those, I mean, obviously like the slicer scene, we just kind of get it's about to happen, and then they just sort of cut away with the blood splatter, which was fine. That's more than enough for me. I needed to know the gory details of it, but that was, like you said, that was kind of the only one other than when they used.
You could have done with a few more sort of like chef themed payoff lines.
Yes.
Like Kurylenko kills someone and then she says, kitchen's closed,
right,
or something like that. Don Johnson has one of those type of lines at the end of the film, but it was when I heard that I was like, hang on, we should have had a few more of these like earlier in the movie.
Right, because another sort of Chekhov's gun element, right, is that they initially in the film, Don Johnson's having a back and forth with the hostess, which is another joke I'm going to bring up in a second. But he's having a back and forth with her about whether you refer to a table by the number of people or if you refer to them as guests. So is it a two top or is it you have guests.
Hmm.
And that would have been really great too if she was like, I just dealt with a 3-top that came in or something like that, or something like that, or like, sorry, I don't have to, or even if another group came, like that, it's like, I don't think we've got enough space, or did you make a reservation, or any of those kinds of things. I agree with you there. Like those are all things that could have been in there.
Yeah, I think, oh God, they should have sent the script to us, Matt.
Exactly. Now, one joke I wanted to mention, going back to the hostess piece. So there's a scene, right? So when we kind of get the point where we know, early in the film where we're starting to get to the plot point where the mobsters are about to set the restaurant on fire, Olga has Don Johnson walk the host of the restaurant out to her car, and that's when they're accosted by the mobsters there, and the son, Diamond Dallas Page's son, refers to the hostess as a hooker. And the funny thing about that is that in German, hostess actually means high-end prostitute. And so it's actually kind of a thing that I don't know how much it's common nowadays, because in America, I don't think we use the term hostess as much. Like we wouldn't say like your hostess will seat you or something like that, like we used to. I think we would just say host. But that was a common thing where German tourists would come to America and go to a restaurant and be like, your hostess will seat you. And like, did we go to the right place? Did the concierge tell us the right place to go, or the guidebook tell us the right place? So it was kind of funny. I don't know if they did that on purpose when they referred to her as a hooker, but it does have that sort of that false cognate piece from German there.
Well, sadly, this film, not enough. It would too much hard work to crowbar that sort of gag in, unless this film was set about a restaurant in Berlin or something.
Right. No, well, just the mention of it, just the fact that he mentions it, like just that he says, what is that, a hooker? And but no, she's the hostess. I was wondering if maybe it was just sort of a send up to that false cognate, if maybe the people making it, if any of them knew of that situation. But it was one that I guess I studying German in school, I minored in German in college, but I had a book on like German bad words in German, different terms, and that one came up, hostess, like because they were saying like you should be careful, and when you're in Germany, don't refer to the person seeking you as a hostess, because that's you're essentially calling her a high-end prostitute.
But there's a few good lines in this film that I really enjoyed here. I liked the I like the line that the kind of like the sort of bickering assassins, the husband there gets, where we sort of first meet him, where he just sort of slides into view on his chair and he's holding a massive rifle, and he says, I like big guns and I cannot lie, which nice little was it SL2 did that? Was that SL2?
Oh, that was no.
Two Live Crew. Was it Two Live Crew? Who was it?
No, it was Sir Mix-a-Lot.
Sir Mix-a-Lot. That's it.
Yes. Yeah.
I enjoyed that, and there's another. I liked the. I think it's the mobster, the kind of the mobster's son has a good line where they're kind of they're sort of trying to get this team of professional hitmen to sort of go in and finally kill off Don Johnson and Olga Kurylenko, and they're sort of updating them on the number of people that have tried and failed to get into that restaurant. And they're sort of like, well, there's one of them who we met earlier says, well, Tom didn't technically go in, he exploded in the car park.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
I enjoyed that. It was, there were some nice lines in here.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that was a bit more of a payoff. I think it was one of those things where I think, like you said, on a second watching, or when you go in knowing what you're getting from this movie, you can kind of let those things happen, like those payoffs kind of happen, where you're not like thinking like, okay, when's the next action scene coming? But like I think you're right, like it would have been good to have more of that associated with the action. That because action movies are known for their one-liners, and so so that definitely would have been more fun.
Yeah, I mean, we do get some decent action in here. There's a kind of like gunfight at the beginning, which is okay. And probably the biggest action sequence in the film is probably the fight that Olga Kurylenko has with a Chinese guy who's sent in, and that's a sort of extended bit of hand-to-hand combat, but it's kind of shot in quite. I thought it was shot in quite a flattering way, because obviously Kurylenko doesn't she's not a martial artist by trade or training. Certainly I'm not aware of, and so it some of the camera work is did suggest to me that it had been done to sort of obscure her kind of sort of lack of professional martial arts expertise. But it's still I always enjoy her kicking somebody's butt. So
exactly, and I think that was one of the things I did like about this was that like she's on the phone and she's just like, I'm not somebody that you want to fuck with, and I think that's definitely like when we talk about like sort of the Schwarzenegger tradition, right? Like she sort of really sets herself up as like, yeah, you don't want to mess with me. And that's something I really like. And also, again, like this is her restaurant. And of course, the restaurant's kind of destroyed throughout because like any action movie setting like that, it's going to be destroyed throughout. But it's still this idea of like, this is my restaurant and I'm going to hold on to it with whatever I've got. And I think it was really great. I mean, I love Don Johnson's character trying to convince her to be like, hey, like let's just take the loss on this, and she's like, no, this is not something I'm going to do, and I'm going to fill up this refrigerator with dead bodies if I have to keep this place.
That was one thing I was wondering about. Like, what are they going to do? They've got their meat locker is jam packed with dead bodies. I don't know what they're going to do the next day to. They can't really be reporting this to the police, I don't think. Right. So I don't know if you want to probably avoid the pate in that restaurant for the next few months.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. It's a classic action movie thing that once the credits roll, sort of the devil take the hindmost on the rest of it. Like nobody cares, right? Like, that's sort of how it is. Now, with Don Johnson being in this, I wanted to ask you: were you a fan of Miami Vice when that was out?
I never watched Miami Vice when it was out. I did like a little while back, when we was stuck in one lockdown or another. I did start to watch Miami Vice because I thought, I've never seen it before, and it was streaming on one of the services that I've got, and I didn't make it through the first couple of episodes, which not for any particular reason, but it didn't really grab me, and so I drifted away into other things. But obviously, no, whilst I never watched it at the time, it was obvious. I was a kid when it was on, and could appreciate its huge status as a TV show, and popularized an entire look in the UK, as I'm sure it did in the UK, with t-shirt and shacket.
Exactly. Yeah. So for me, I rediscovered Miami Vice. So of course, as a kid watching it too, I enjoyed it. And then a friend of mine, I bought the DVDs and we were watching it. And the thing that always strikes me about Miami Vice is sort of the film noir beats in it, but how Michael Mann sort of takes what we think of film noir and replaces it with like pastels, and like this Miami, but like when you watch it, like the framing, you think of classic film noir like cinematography. Michael Mann like really borrowed from it, a lot of the tones and a lot of the elements of the film. But it's a fascinating film show in the sense that like stylistically, it's kind of more stylistically there than it is from a story standpoint. And as we were watching it, I think it's one of those shows like it lasted 5 seasons, about a little over 100 episodes, which nowadays 5 seasons is like what you would think of as a show. Like a lot of shows like end it after that, but as a show, it's probably more like 3 seasons. Like after it gets past the 3rd season, it had kind of run its course on sort of what it was doing there. And I still love it as a show. It's still one of my favorites. But Don Johnson in it, I mean, he was just like so like this character he plays here is kind of more like his Nash Bridges character. But
I shared a house with a girl who was a huge Nash Bridges fan.
Oh, really?
There's a conversation. But I remember she was on the phone. I don't know who she was on the phone to, her boyfriend or something. And she said, "Oh yeah, but I got to get back in time for Nash Bridges." The idea of which I still today find incredible.
Yeah. Now because in the US that it aired on Friday nights. I don't know if it was similar in the UK.
Oh, I can't remember when it was on. Yeah, I'm afraid I can't remember when it was on.
Because I could just think about that, like, because Friday night, it's like like, oh, I've got to be in by 9 o'clock on a Friday night when I'm making plans with somebody. Like, definitely would be a bit of an intrusion.
Well, I don't know what maybe I don't know whether she was into Don Johnson. Maybe she was more into Cheech Marion. Who knows?
Oh, that could be too. Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, no, funny because you mentioned about that show. I used to watch it kind of here and there. I think the first couple seasons of it because again, if I was home on a Friday night, I would just throw it on. But Ty from Comeuppance actually binged it. He went through the whole show, and so he was kind of talking about like different people that would show up and stuff like that in it. But yeah, it's interesting with him because I was looking at his CV and he's had a bit of a resurgence. And which I think is kind of cool that he's kind of, and it seems like he's picking roles like this as part of the resurgence, where, he's a bit flawed as a character. He's not this perfect guy, and I think that's kind of a cool thing.
He's always done a good heel, like even back in sort of like his heyday. He did that sort of talking of film noir and Miami Vice. He did, was it called The Hot Spot around 1990, which was kind of considered a neo noir type movie, and he plays a really good heel in that film. So I think he there's something about him, or that he can always sell that type of role as somebody who is got that charming element, but also is probably got, I don't know, shady past, or is got some sort of secret that he's ashamed of or something. So and I think Don Johnson's also interesting because, as we've alluded to, he's somebody who's had lots of career ups and downs along the ways, where he's just, I mean, I don't really know how he got Nash Bridges, and that really revived him then, and then obviously that ended and he kind of slipped away again. And it was kind of got cast in, what did he get cast in? It was either sort of like Rodriguez thing or a Tarantino thing. Machete, yes.
Yeah.
That seemed to be the sort of start of a bit of a, as you say, a bit of a renaissance for him.
Yeah, exactly. He did Machete. He also did Django Unchained.
That's it.
So he's doing these small parts in bigger films like that. And then I think more recently he was in Knives Out, which again, that's probably, it's almost like he gets these parts that kind of get him another like boost. That he's in another thing that has a big, like again, like Knives Out. I think it's like one of those ones where it's like, okay, everybody's watching Knives Out. Everybody watched like that movie. And granted, more discussion was about Chris Evans's sweater in that film than Don Johnson's performance. But I think it's still enough to like get him more roles.
Well, I mean, God, that's pretty harsh, because there's a lot of actors in Knives Out, and
Exactly.
and so you can go through the entire cast, and you go to Chris Pratt's jumper before you go to Don Johnson.
I remember. I think it was trending on Twitter. I think it was. So it's like everybody really was a big fan of that. So, but yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of how he goes from here. But I think one of the things I think he does well in this role, and I think someone like him you would think maybe wouldn't do this, but I think he does a good job also as being a supporting part to Kurylenko. Like, he's not trying to steal scenes from her. He's not trying to outdo. He's there to kind of let Kurylenko shine, and I think that also helps this movie.
Yeah, he's just he's got he's he's goddamn Crockett, isn't he? So I mean, he's just a charismatic, very relaxed. I mean, he's always been a very relaxed screen presence, and I don't think he's ever been a sort of scene stealer.
No.
I think he's just sort of very relaxed in his own skin, and I think he seems to be of that sort of style of actor, is like, if I can help make you better, then that will make me look better, and we all win. He's not somebody who goes in sort of with that sort of a more competitive mindset and is just looking to sort of steal all the thunder for himself. But it's a kind of interesting thing that you mentioned about sort of Don Johnson getting these kind of like roles that just kind of boost up his profile sort of once again. And I think Olga, Kurylenko in her career is in that sort of interesting space where she sort of needs to, she's making a lot of like DTV type films, straight to streaming type films, but she still, needs those like periodic, like big screen outings to just remind people, oh yeah, that's that lady out of Quantum of Solace. And it was, as a fan of hers, it was good to see that she's got that gig in Thunderbolts, because that's going to be obviously going to be a big production, is going to, which is going to be seen by a lot of people, and will kind of give her that little sort of career uplift that will get her through the next few years as a sort of viable leading lady.
Yeah, because I think that's what it is, right? So like if you're in a Marvel movie, if you're in, something like a Knives Out or what, like in Don Johnson's case, but for her, like a Bond movie or any of those, when people are selling direct to video things, especially now in this sort of direct to streaming world where all you've got is your cover on the screen there to determine. And I guess it was kind of the same thing in the video store where all you had was the cover to sell people. But if you can see somebody on there that people recognize, and I think even too, like if they put it up, it's not above a DTV movie distributor to put like, from the Thunderbolts, Olga Kurylenko, but I know, the people who like Marvel movies really, really like them. And they do kind of seek out, like, they sort of start to develop fandoms for, different, stars in those films and start to seek out more of their movies. And so, yeah, I think you're right. For her to be able to, reprise that role. It looks like she's also going to be in Extraction too, which is, another big one. So, I think it's every time she could do a few of those, and I think it's like almost like one of those movies begets 3 DTV roles for her, perhaps. Maybe that's the calculus there.
Yeah, and if the film career falls through, she can always fall back on the convention circuit now that she's got a couple of like Marvel movies under her belt.
That's a good point, right? Because once you're in one of those, Olga Kurylenko, who played the Taskmaster, is going to be in San Diego or whatever. And so, yeah, maybe
you can always get five. You can always charge $5 for an autograph. So
exactly.
You're not going to go hungry.
Yeah, maybe if she ever shows up here in Philadelphia, I could buy a DVD copy of one of her DTV films and have her sign it and see what she says there. Now, one last thing I wanted to touch on before we kind of give any final thoughts on this. Diamond Dallas Page plays the baddie. He plays Dom the baddie. He's just listed as Dallas Page, but big time WCW wrestler. I think he moved over to WWF or WWE when the WCW was bought out. But I wanted to ask, did you have any kind of did you watch professional wrestling at all when you were younger or at any time?
I watched the UK's professional wrestling, which is very different to to what I think most Americans would understand as wrestling. It was a different time. It was a different era. But so yeah, I never watched any of any sort of WWE or WWF or WW whatever franchise is relevant. So yeah, I was unaware that this guy had ever been a wrestler, but it kind of makes sense when you see you see how he's built.
Yeah. So yeah, the thing for him, and it's interesting because he kind of dovetails a little bit with my DTV, watching time, is that, and so I watched wrestling when I was young, late 80s, that period. My friends and I would, on Saturday we would watch it, or my birthday falls around the same time as WrestleMania, so I'd have like a birthday party and like have a couple friends over and we'd watch WrestleMania for my birthday. Of course I fell out, didn't really watch it much, and then when I was in college, my friends and I got into the WCW was like the competing entity, and Ted Turner owned WCW, and what he did is he paid a bunch of the really big stars from WWF, like Hulk Hogan, to come over to WCW, which was a big thing because the guy who owned it, WWF, Vince McMahon, he didn't pay his wrestlers well at all. So they all came over. And Diamond Dallas Page was an interesting one because Hulk Hogan was a heel in WCW. He was a bad guy who ran a group called the NWO, and Dallas Page was somebody who was one of the few good guys that was against him. And he ends up winning a match against who's Hollywood Hulk Hogan at that time, because he was a bad guy, with like a bad ref or something. And he was like the champ for a while. And I remember one of the things was he was the champ for a while, and he loses his belt at the beginning of what we used to watch was Monday Night Nitro on TNT, cable channel here in the US. So we'd watch the wrestling and we would just get a kick out of it. It was kind of just like a big joke for us to watch all the characters and stuff on that. And then there would be a direct to video action movie that they would show after the Nitro. So like movies like Virtual Assassin, which we talked about here on the podcast. I first saw that, I think, on like after this this Nitro thing. So that's how we knew Diamond Dallas Page. And one of the things I remember is one of those Nitro episodes, he lost his belt at the beginning of the episode. And one of the rules about wrestling is you can't transfer belts. At least at that time, you couldn't transfer belts unless it was a pay-per-view event. So if somebody wins it for one event, they keep it through till the next pay-per-view event. But so the fact that he lost it meant that, like, okay, he was probably going to win it back somehow at the end of the episode, which he did. So he kept calling himself a two-time champion because he won the belt, like lost it, which didn't really make any sense, but he kept calling himself that. And he would say it in this high-pitched voice where he'd be like, two-time, two-time, two-time. And so my friends and I just got the biggest kick out of that, and we would just like joke, like, and anything that came up twice, we'd be like two-time, two-time. And so when I saw him in this movie, I just was thinking back to that, which has been like 25 years since we watched him wrestle. So that's always stuck with me, that Diamond Dallas Page, two-time. And so but that's kind of my history with him with wrestling and all of that.
Well, not nice that he could take you back down memory lane by popping up in this film.
Exactly, but he also was a part of the building of the site, because I think my friends and I watched some direct-to-video stuff when I was in high school, and then when I got into college, it was one of those things where like I kind of did it, but it was like it was a way that I with some of my friends who I not from high school but that I'd met in college, we were able to kind of get into direct-to-video stuff through watching wrestling, and then these direct-to-video movies that happened after. It kind of fueled me getting through to when I started the site in, I guess, 07 or something like that.
Cool.
Yeah, good old Diamond Dallas Page. But I guess, as we wrap up here, any other thoughts on the film that we may not have discussed?
I think I just want to perhaps finish by just giving a little word of praise for Olga Kurylenko, because she is somebody that I really enjoy as an actress, and I'm afraid largely for not very sophisticated reasons. I just she is my jam. I find her very, very attractive, and that's largely the appeal. But I enjoy seeing female-led action films, and more broadly, Olga Kurylenko, she's actually like a pretty well-rounded like actress. Like, she can do comedy, she can kind of deliver on the action, and she can also sort of, if a scene demands like a bit of dramatic delivery, she can actually deliver on that. So I think this film, High Heat, we get to see all of those different strands at different points in the film. We get to see her deliver some action. We get to see her deliver some some funny lines, and there's a few sort of like dramatic moments within the film, and she delivers on all those fronts. So there is there's a lot of people out there earning sort of who've got action careers, who they can do the martial arts, but they cannot deliver a page of dialogue to save their lives. But Olga Kurylenko, she covers all bases.
Yeah, and I think even to kind of further that point, right, is that with these direct-to-video movies, there's a lot of times and maybe this movie was a little different, but a lot of times the dramatic pieces are the ones that they don't get as many takes on, right? Like, you've got to, you either hit it once or twice, or you don't, because they want to spend more time on the action. So the fact that she is able to deliver in movies like this, I think shows that, like, the range she has, like you said. And for sure, she's both the films we're talking about today, she's wearing leather pants, and it doesn't she's not hard on the eyes at all. But I think, to your point, like, you could do that with a lot of actresses, right? You could put a lot of people, and I mean, it's kind of with the Marvel movies, they just get a lot of really good looking actresses, and they sort of put them in the spandex or the leather outfits there, and then have stunt doubles come in and do all the rest of the scenes. But she can kind of do these scenes really well. And I think you're right. Like, somebody's got to, I think part of the reason why she's able to kind of transition from these small roles in big films to these films is that she does have that range, which is really good.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, she wouldn't get those gigs in those bigger pictures if she wasn't a sort of an all-round performer. And yeah, we get to see all of those sides in High Heat.
Excellent. Well, yeah. So we'll take a break here, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about the Courier. All right, so we'll be right back.
Hey everyone, we'll get back to the podcast in a second, but first, I have a new novel out, Oldman Arms. It follows Colvin Hall, an aspiring writer who decides to write a romance novel on a whim, sends it to a publisher, and it becomes a huge success. The only problem is, no one knows it's him because he writes under the pen name Mary Ballantyne. With all of the money and none of the fame,
Colvin longs for the world to recognize his accomplishments. When he gets an opportunity to write a freelance article on a washed-up 90s pop star looking for a comeback, that recognition starts to come, but is it all he hoped for? It doesn't matter, because he's getting it whether he likes it or not. Oldman Arms is the second in my author's cycle after A Girl and a Gun, and like that previous novel, it explores themes of success and accomplishment in the 21st century. You can buy it now through Amazon in paperback or on Kindle. The link is in the podcast description. As always, thanks for your support.
Second in our Olga Kurylenko double feature, The Courier. So let me see if I can do a good synopsis of this one here. Essentially, we've got this mob boss played by Gary Oldman, who he's about to be, or he's been arrested, and there's a witness to one of his crimes who is in England, and the key is that he needs to testify in sort of a secret court hearing in order to put Gary Oldman away. But of course, as is always the case, these mob bosses have tons of people on the inside, and sure enough, somebody on the inside is about to kill this witness, is played by Amit Shah. And Olga Kurylenko is the courier who, for some reason, they don't really explain this in the film, but for some reason, Olga Kurylenko as the courier has to bring the record or the streaming equipment to this to the location where the witness is supposed to be. Turns out the streaming equipment has cyanide poisoning in it. Olga Kurylenko is able to take out everybody, get the witness out of there, but the problem is they're locked in the parking garage of the apartment complex where the streaming is supposed to happen. And Gary Oldman has his daughter is sending people to take out this witness and Olga Kurylenko is the courier, and so really she's got to survive in this garage, and hopefully if she survives long enough, she can get this this witness to safety, and he could testify and put Gary Oldman away. I think that's probably the bulk of it. It seems like a little bit more convoluted than I thought, because it seemed like it was a simpler plot until I started explaining it. But yeah, Will, what were your thoughts on The Courier?
Well, I remember when The Courier was coming out, because I was quite excited for this, because I think the plan for this was it was going to be theatrically released, and it kind of came out in December 2019. And I think this film basically just like ran into the pandemic, and I see that it got sort of theatrically released in some other countries, but not until sort of 2021. So I think it just sort of sat around, and they eventually put it out. But yeah, I was really looking forward to this, because a theatrically released Olga Kurylenko led action movie. I kind of thought, okay, this is, maybe this is, Olga kind of like getting up into that top tier, maybe sort of moving up into some, maybe she's got aspirations to kind of move up into that sort of Mila Jovovich tier of female action stars. When I then subsequently watched the film, I have to say I was disappointed with this film. Rewatching it though for this podcast, I'm a little bit warmer actually on it, because I think the reason I was warmer on it is because I knew what the flaws were, and so I was ready for them, and I could ignore them a little bit more. So I think it's one of those kind of low budget action films. So it's essentially this whole film takes place in a garage, in a kind of underground car park or something, which is not the sexiest location for an action film, but hey, it's the one they're using in this film, and I think they largely do a pretty good job here. There's some good get some variations on sort of I think they use the location well, and they kind of find some they managed to sort of stage a series of action sequences in that garage, which kind of exploit the potential, or make the most of the kind of limited situations that they've got there. So it's pretty good from that perspective. My main beef though is I think that this film could have been, I think if you change the casting of a couple of characters, I think it would transform this film, and I think it would easily bump it up like, maybe a couple of marks, I think, in my mind. And I think that the main problem with this film is the kind of sidekick character, the witness that Olga Kurylenko has to protect, played by Amit Shah. I mean, he is that kind of like irritating sidekick a la Joe Pesci, sort of, from the Lethal Weapon series. Now, Joe Pesci, he made it work here. Amit Shah is not Joe Pesci, and he just stinks the screen out. The other, I think, other sort of major problem with this film is, I guess, the secondary baddie, I guess, or the kind of the baddie who's leading the team of killers who are trying to track down and get hold of this witness, trying to bump off Olga Kurylenko. It's the kind of the Bryant character, who's played by an actor called William Moseley. I don't know. Maybe he can act. He didn't do any good acting in this film, and yeah, those two performances, because they're kind of so pivotal to the film, they really kind of hamper the film. And then, yeah, Gary Oldman. It's kind of like they don't really know what to do with Gary Oldman. It's like they've got him. I wonder what the story is with his involvement, because this film was produced by the people who put together. The name's gone straight out of my head. The kind of where he played the film where he, Darkest Hour, where he plays Winston Churchill. There's one of the producers on that is the producer on this. So I imagine that's how they got Gary Oldman into the film. But it's like he kind of came in at the last minute, and they suddenly like, we can't just have Gary Oldman do that. We need a little bit more for him to do, and they just sort of concocted some kind of irrelevant scenes for him. So he just sort of, all his stuff largely feels like filler. And I think that, yeah, for me, this is kind of okay to decent. And it could have been fixed if you changed the casting of those two characters, and you'd actually found something of a little bit more substance for Gary Oldman to do.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on all of those points. So I think, sort of taking them, I think, so the William Moseley person, it's like he's trying to be Gary Oldman in The Professional, right? And
yes.
and he just can't pull it off at all.
No.
And it's not working on any level, and it's kind of too bad, because it like you said, it hampers the film because he's trying to like force this Gary Oldman in The Professional thing in the film. It's like, I mean, obviously Gary Oldman in The Professional is one of, like, when you think of like 90s, films, or 90s I want to say 90s independent, action kind of films. I mean, that role is just completely iconic. And
yeah,
if you're going to try to pull that role off, you got to be a certain. I mean, I don't think you could. I don't think it's not something that you want to try. It's like kind of maybe our conversation that we had before we started the podcast, where I found out that Don Johnson covered "Tell It Like It Is," the Aaron Neville song. It's like probably Aaron Neville. If you're not a certain level of singer, you probably don't want to try to pull off Aaron Neville. And I think, if you're not a certain level of actor, I don't think you want to try to pull off, Gary Oldman in what is probably, his biggest. I think it was kind of the iconic role that really pushed him through, or one of the big ones. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's the first thing. I think kind of going on what you talked about. So that there, I think, again, the annoying character thing. I think totally that was another note that I had, was that just like, there's certain people put these characters in these movies, and I mean, like the Amit Shah, like that witness character, like there's points in the film where he's yelling at Olga Kurylenko, like saying like she's getting him stuck and stuff like that. And it's like, she's saving your life. Like,
yes,
if somebody's saving my life, the last thing I'm going to do is yell at them and say like, you're going to get us killed. It's like, no, I'm already dead if it's not for Olga Kurylenko. So whatever she says, I'm doing, because I'm not going to yell at her. And, and all that does is it makes it hard for us as the audience watching it to have this sort of cackling voice yelling at the hero. It's almost like, being, watching a scene where somebody's, I don't know, it just doesn't work there. It's sort of more annoying than anything. The Gary Oldman thing, like you talked about, I think because they tried to give him a beefier role, what it does is it hurts the film, because we get more scenes of the baddie than we needed, and we get fewer scenes of Olga Kurylenko as the hero. And I think that's always a tough thing to pull off, especially because it's not like he has a cool baddie, like there's nothing remarkable about his baddie, and he's got his daughter there, and his daughter is, being a jerk to the FBI detail that's watching him on house arrest. Like none of that stuff is really working that well, but we're also losing Kurylenko in the process, and they do a good job of establishing Kurylenko as a compelling hero, and so I think if we're losing her to an uncompelling baddie, is that a proper word? Uncompelling? I don't know if it's like a not compelling baddie. We're losing out in both senses there. So there's that part, and then kind of the last thing for me is just the story itself. I think, when you're stuck in a car park there like that, um, you can only do so much. And I think this movie for
Yes.
me, if there was a TV series called The Courier that had Olga Kurylenko just, delivering packages and getting into action scrapes, for, 13 episodes a season, this had enough material for a 43-minute episode of The Courier TV show. But it didn't have enough material for a movie, I think. And I think that's the other thing that kind of hurts this film. But like you said, from a DTV action standpoint, it kind of gets you through the 90 minutes that you need it to. But yeah, there's ways that it could have been better.
Yeah, I think you make an interesting point there. If they'd set this in a different location, like, I don't know, if they'd found some, come up with some convoluted reason for that it takes place in a different, in a different type of building or something, then I think that might have helped the film, because then they could have, some reason they've got to work their way through the building, whatever whatever that building is. Just as you say, there's only so much you can do in a car park, and I think they do as much as they can, and they do it as well as they can. But they're stretching it thin, to say the least. And the thing about, like, Amit Shah as that kind of, like, the kind of irritating sidekick character, like, he's too much. That's the
Right.
problem. Like, it's completely, that character, absolutely understandable that they're going to get stressed by the situation that they find themselves in, and that that kind of transmits the jeopardy, because you've got all these cold-blooded, stone cold killers who are not going to be phased by the situation they find themselves in. So actually, they're the kind of audience surrogate, by, like, oh my god, oh my god, there's all these dead bodies everywhere, or whatever. But he's just far too strong a flavor, and I don't understand what on earth he's doing in this film, because I think either the year before or like 2 years before, he was in a Dave Bautista action film with Pierce Brosnan as well. Keeps cropping up on this podcast. Who called Final Score, and he plays exactly the same role as the kind of, like, ordinary schmo who finds himself, embroiled in this, mayhem unleashed scenario, and he's just as irritating in that film as he is in this one. So I can't believe that you would. Somebody obviously looked at that and thought, yeah, we want that, and we want that in this film. I mean, I don't know who decided that. That was a terrible decision.
Yeah, it's funny because I think kind of maybe dovetailing with this idea that, like, William Moseley, right, trying to do Gary Oldman in The Professional, right, isn't working. I think there's almost this idea that filmmakers, when they make these movies, they feel like they want to have that Joe Pesci in the Lethal Weapon films character. And like you said, Joe Pesci won an Oscar. He's like not everybody can just do Joe Pesci, and just because an actor is competent enough to do other things, this is a very tricky thing to pull off and not make it annoying. And Joe Pesci has qualities as an actor to be able to make that kind of character endearing. This is not endearing, right? This is taking
No.
away from the film, and I think this is something that these films do a lot. This is a sort of a trope that comes up in these action movies: the annoying character that's just kind of along for the ride, that just screams and yells and causes a lot of problems, and it's like, yeah, I think that's what it is. I think that they feel like they're doing it in the tradition of Lethal Weapon, and I think you just think of who you're trying to mimic here. Again, Don John. I'm sorry, not Don Johnson. Joe Pesci won an Oscar. He's an Oscar-winning actor. There's something to that. He's at that level. I mean, again, Gary Oldman won an Oscar. Trying to just copy what he does in one of his more iconic roles isn't going to work. And so
And
again,
you've got Shane Black writing the script as well, so that
yeah.
kind of helps as well.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's like, you know, I think there's just these issues, right? Yeah, like you said, yeah, Shane. I mean, it's like yeah, I think that's kind of the thing is that we've got this really great character in Olga Kurylenko's, Courier, who should be the anchor of everything and should be the underpinning of everything, and everything that she's in works, especially when she doesn't have Amit Shah screaming at her. It always works, and I think that's something that I don't know if, like, how it works when you're making a movie like this, that you say, like, okay, yeah, Karolinko's great here, but maybe we need more Gary Oldman, because he's a big name and we can only do so much in the garage. Like, let's have him in there. But I think she could have, even just in scenes where she's not fighting anybody, she's good. If it wasn't Amit Shah screaming at her, if it was another character, they probably could have had some good interactions that would have been fun to watch. And so, yeah, I think it's almost like not knowing what you've got and kind of adding on things and thinking they're going to work when they don't necessarily. Maybe, I guess, from DTV standpoint, they kind of got to work with what they've got, and so it's like this is what they created, and so they were stuck with it. But it was kind of too bad in some of those cases.
I mean, you don't need Gary Oldman anything with Gary Oldman in that film. Right. I mean, you just need, like, a voice on the phone. You just need, like, the Brian character just needs to keep getting these phone calls with some voice on the end of the phone going, have you got this situation under control yet? Right. That you don't need all that stuff in America. He feels completely divorced from the movie. And I kind of, like, wonder sort of, like, how much prep they really had for his involvement in the film, because if you've got Gary Oldman on board with this film, it's like, well, why is he not, maybe he's only going to do like 3 days of filming, but you'd have him sort of, like, eventually come down to that building, like, to take charge of the situation himself, and there'd be some face off between him and Kurylenko. I mean, that's why on earth would you not have the two biggest names in your film share a single scene together? So it just sort of, like, sort of screams to me that sort of, yeah, Gary Oldman said, yeah, I can do that, but I can only do it in these dates after all other filming had completely shut down. And so they just had do these scenes of him in his flat in America, and they kind of, like, kind of cobble it into the stuff that they've all put together, and it just emphasizes how irrelevant that stuff is to the film. I mean, it just, you can see it in the writing for the character, because what is Gary Oldman's character? I mean, he's just an eye patch, somebody who likes to sit around in his bathrobe listening to opera. I mean, that is his character. I mean, it's as thin as that.
Yeah, and that's the other trope, right? The mob boss who listens to opera or classical music or something, right? That like, like, how sophisticated is he, right? In his robes, sipping his spirits or whatever, while these FBI agents are watching him, and how great he is. And yeah, you're right. Like, he doesn't contribute. There's nothing there's nothing about this that's like, if it had just been the director, or somebody else on the set, a stuntman, in the shadows, right, with the outline of them in a robe, saying things. You're right. Like, it wouldn't have mattered either way. I think the only person who interacts with Gary Oldman, who then interacts with the other stars, the ones that are based in London, is Dermot Mulroney, right? He's in a scene with Gary Oldman, and then he's in a scene with Kurylenko and Amit Shah. So that's the only connection, really, that the film has. That it's almost like a Godfrey Ho movie in that sense, right? That you've got, like, it's almost like they took two movies and put them together and said, "Oh, here we go." And then Richard Harrison's just talking on the Garfield phone to to William Bryant or something, Agent Bryant.
I love the idea that we may actually see these Gary Oldman scenes again in another film. It just hasn't been released yet. And we'll know.
Like, yes, the filmmakers have like 20 movies set up with Gary Oldman as a BI patch villain, right? Exactly. Yeah, I think that part of it, I think, and again, the other thing about this movie that I also kind of didn't like, that I think sort of juxtaposing it with High Heat is, High Heat, yes, it had those sort of like those complicated relationship pieces of it, but the script itself was pretty simple. This is one of those ones where it's just like this idea that these mob bosses, right, have like people everywhere. And so, spoiler alert for it. Maybe I should have announced it or ahead of time that we're going to do spoilers on this, but it's not much of a spoiler, really. I think the spoiler would have been if it didn't work out this way. But that Dermot Mulroney is on the take with this guy, and it's just a matter of time before they reveal that for us. And I think that kind of plot thing that happens in these action movies with mobsters that we didn't see in High Heat, that just everybody's on the take and you just never know when they're going to reveal themselves as being on somebody's payroll. This movie does that, and it's kind of like, okay, when are we going to find out that this person's turning or this person's turning? And that's a bit of a tired trope for me.
And this film really like wears that trope really thin, because literally everybody is on the take in this film, because the lady who's leading the police team that initially escorts Amit Shah to kind of the place where he's going to do this, kind of speak to the courtroom. She's on the take. Bryant's on the take. Dermot Mulroney's on the take. I mean, to be honest, how did Amit Shah get through this film? I mean, if all these tiers of law enforcement are on the take and being paid to get this guy dead, I mean, how on earth did he survive?
Right. It's exhausting for us as the viewer, right? So yeah, it's hard enough, and it's like, I guess that's the idea, is that the Courier is the only person he can trust, right, out of everybody, that you can't trust anybody else. But like, yeah, it's like, it's kind of funny too that Dermot Mulroney is the only person in that London, in the London hospital that isn't on the take. That you'd think that there'd be other people in there that are on the take too, and no, but yeah, it's like the surprise would have been if Dermot Mulroney went through the entire film and wasn't on the take, like we get to the end and it turns out he actually is one of the good guys. That would have been the surprise that we would have had to make the spoiler alert for.
Yeah, I mean, it just is. I think the Courier for me suffers from sort of like my baseball like approach to films, which is you kind of get so many strikes and then I'm afraid I have to call you out.
Yeah.
And, like, I know a lot of these sort of films, they're not perfect. And if you kind of do enough, if you do enough good things, I can forgive certain tropes being used, certain, blatant rip-offs being used. But if you commit too many, like, if you get too many strikes against you, it's kind of like 3 strikes and you're out. And here, too many tired tropes, too many bad casting decisions, too many bad sort of plot choices, and it's just like, oh man, I'm afraid I'm going to have to view this film quite poorly, and I don't want to do that. I want to enjoy these types of films.
Yeah, because to that point, Kurylenko is great in this. Like, like you see where she is an action lead. I mean, she looks the part, she sells it, she has the one-liners, everything about it. And even like we were talking about the comedy aspect of it, like her one-liners and her interactions with the baddies are really great in this. So I think, all of that is really good. I think one of the things that they do is she gets captured by the baddies. And I think this is kind of one of these other tropes that it's I think, what is it, the guys from Co-op, it's called the prerequisite torture scene, and it's not so bad with her in this case, where like they're trying to beat it out of her to find out where Amit Shah is hiding. I think what it is that they use it as the device, right, to like get him back into the role, the part, so that there's more peril there. There's sort of an all hope is lost element there that again, these movies seem to have, which again, High Heat didn't have that element. It didn't have an all hope is lost part to it. It just kind of went about its business, so I think, again, this idea that when you write a script that there has to be this piece at like the 15 minutes from the end mark where it looks like everybody's going to lose and we don't know how it's going to turn out. You don't necessarily need that element to make it, but that was, I guess that's how they had to get there, was having Kurylenko's character get captured, tortured, because she doesn't give up Amit Shah. That's the thing. She doesn't give him up. He gives himself up to save her. He has this one moment where he just can't bear to hear, that she's going to get killed or something like that. So, but yeah, she's really great in this film.
Yep, she's really good. There's quite a surprising amount of sort of brutal violence in this film, and we get to see Olga Kurylenko stab a man through the throat with a windscreen wiper, and which was quite brutal. And I think somebody gets I don't know who drives over their head, but somebody gets their head driven over, which which was a little bit more graphic than I was expecting. I mean, not graphic in the grand scheme of things, but sort of so used to sort of anodyne action movies, these days with 12As, that when you do see some action with a bit of gratuitous violence, you're sort of, I didn't realize they still did that.
Yeah, that's a good point because again, comparing it to High Heat, where we're talking about how like the action the action could have been a little bit more gratuitous, at least in terms of like using the space that was available. This film does use the space in ways that we weren't expecting. Like you said, like the windscreen wiper there. It's like she's dealing with this oversized guy who she really is, like we talked about, I think earlier, with her being a woman and being a slighter of frame. She's up against some of these huge men, and I think it's Lee Charles, I think, is the one who plays the guy that and I mean, he's just a Hulk. And I think too many movies would have made the decision to say, okay, she's a martial artist too, she's going to just beat him, and we just sort of accept it, right? That maybe she gets him to some kind of judo hold or jiu-jitsu hold and breaks his arm or something, and that's it, and she wins. But no, like, he's really beating her up, and she needs to pull something to save herself, and it's like anything that's around, and there it is, she just rips it off and stabs him through the throat with it. And it was a creative use of the space there, and they did a little bit more of that I liked. I think maybe more than High Heat did with the kitchen. But again, I mean, they had to. I mean, they were stuck in that garage for the entire time, and so they needed to get as creative as possible. But you're right. Like, she found some interesting ways to to do that, to kind of get. I think the other thing too is that they did kind of make it more of a situation where, like, okay, how is she going to get out of here when she's completely outnumbered? These are all professionals. What is she going to do to save herself? And yeah, I think some of that stuff worked. And again, like you said, it was a little bit more on the macabre side. I think she runs over, I think, with an SUV. She takes an SUV and runs over one of the other guys, like, who, she's in a fight with him or something like that. And so I think maybe she hotwired the SUV. Is that, I think maybe, so I think maybe Amit Shah might have been in the vehicle with her, screaming at her that she was driving poorly or something like that, which made it all the more fun for us when that happened.
If only she'd driven over his head.
Right, exactly. I know.
Did you? One random point that I wanted to point out, which I don't know how I'd overlooked this on my first viewing, but this has got to be the only action film I've ever seen where Joe Biden is quoted.
Yes. Yeah, and he's quoted like well before he became president. When he was just vice president, which is really interesting too. And at this time, there wasn't even a thought of him being president. There was no thought that he was even going to run, or that if he did run, that he would be anywhere near successful. So yeah, I don't know what prompted them to quote him in this. It was really fascinating. And one of the things I'm hoping for that we eventually get is some of these movies that take place in government offices where they have to have the pictures of the president. I think I've gotten a Trump one so far. I think I did get a Trump, but I don't think it'll be good to get a Biden in there, because I think I've got a collection of them from the site, like, just sort of not meaning to, but it's sort of like, you watch a movie and it takes place in the 80s and there's Reagan's picture in the back. And, I think I've gotten everybody so far. I think there's been a Trump at some point. So I'm hoping that at some point we get a Biden as well.
It does seem to be dying out, though, as a bit of a sort of, trope of action films. I mean, in the 80s, I mean, it was literally, it seemed it was contractually obliged to, if you were, talking to somebody from the CIA, there would be, a picture of the president, on the office wall behind them. Somehow though, that seems that trope seems to have died out. It's a bit sad, I think.
Yeah, because I think even like I think, was it Shark Attack 3? I think kind of played on that trope, because it takes place in Mexico, or part of it does. And there's the scene where they had the president at that time, Vicente Fox, is a picture of him in the background. So it's almost like they did the same thing. But yeah, it was one of those things. And I guess part of it is like, with the president, you don't have to worry about like royalties or anything. Like, you can have that picture. But yeah, it was I mean, I don't know how many of those Philippine, actioners would have a picture of Reagan, and then later it was, George H.W. Bush. It is kind of funny that, yeah, you're right. Like, it doesn't happen as much anymore. That, I feel like I had some with Obama, but I could be wrong. It might have been by then that they've kind of slowed it down. And so actually that's a good point, 'cause I don't know if I got Trump either. Now that you mention it, I think it's possible that by the time Obama's in office, they weren't doing it as much, because it was kind of one of the more fun elements of these movies.
You want the set though, don't you? You want the
Exactly.
set of your presidents. So
Exactly.
somebody needs to make, you might not want to make an action film and put a picture of Donald Trump in it, but
Right.
come on. There are
Yes.
people out there who care about this stuff.
I know, exactly. I know. Well, it's interesting because I don't know if it would count, because Ty and I were joking that Randall Emmett, with all the legal issues that Trump is going through, that maybe Randall Emmett will show up with his scroll and be like, hey, Trump, would you like to be a baddie in one of my movies? And this movie kind of shows, like, with Gary Oldman not really needing to do much, that you could do 13 minutes of Trump as a baddie in a movie and it would work out well. But I don't know if that counts as the collection, because it's not the same as the picture in the back of a faux government office, where he's just
Yeah, I'm a traditionalist. I want it in a, I want it in a frame
right.
on the wall of a government office.
Yeah, it's
That's
funny
how I
too
want my presidents.
when you watch some of those. Like, there was one that I saw, I can't remember which one it was, where they had the American flags, sort of adorning, on either side of it. And they were like the cheapest American flags I'd ever seen. Like, you could see through them in the scene. That's how cheap they were. And I just love that idea that, like, you go through the trouble to get that picture of the president up there. But, the flags that you're getting for the scene, you just go to, like, the local, like, whatever, department store and just get, like, the cheapest, 4th of July, decoration American flags for it.
But actually, that reminded me, because I recently rewatched Under Siege, and George W. Bush appears in that film, like, not as sort of like, news footage, but supposedly as part of the film, because the the battleship that the action takes place on is being taken out of commission, and George W. Bush is performing a ceremony on it to take it out of condition. So he has actually been, George W. Bush has actually appeared in a 90s action movie, and it kind of made me wonder, like, how are there any other presidents that have appeared in action movies, like, not as, say, like news footage, but sort of supposedly in kind of, they find a way to inveigle it in.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Now, one thing I want to quickly say, I think you're talking about George H.W. Bush, right? Was in.
Oh yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
wrong Bush.
So it's a very confusing thing. The easiest way to do it, I think, the easiest way to get them confused. The first one, I always call him Bush 41. And then Bush 43 for the George W. Yeah, so
that sounds like I'm calling a play on the scrimmage line.
I know.
Bush 41.
Exactly.
Bush 43.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and again, so it's kind of funny, because I think with the son, with Bush 43, or George W., I think he's kind of gone, like, completely just sort of like under, he's sort of gone out of off the radar a little bit. Like, he appeared a little bit, I think, because his reputation has gotten a little bit better with how bad Trump was. That he's like, like, he's a little bit more liked now. But I think he was doing, like, a masterclass series and things like that. But for the most part, he's kind of just sort of like, I'm gonna take a break and sort of let people try to forget about the Iraq War a little bit, while I go under. So he might not. But Bill Clinton. I remember Bill Clinton, when he was out of office, he did put in for he was trying to pitch him doing a talk show with people. And at the time, you wanted $25 million for it, which was a big sum at that time. That would have made him, like, way higher than anybody else. And nobody bit. Nobody went for it. But he's one that I would think, like, you could put him in something. You could have in the past. I think he would have been good to just sort of show up and do something. I mean, the thing with him, right, is a lot of times people would do impressions of him, right? That, like, you'd be on the phone and somebody would do their Clinton impression, and it's like, oh, I'm talking to, he's talking to the president, when he's really not. But yeah, I don't know that any president, though, has starred in a movie. That's a good point. I'm trying to. I mean, obviously Ronald Reagan before he was president, but as an actual president, I don't know.
So I think I think it might just be Bush 41 in Under
Yeah.
Siege.
Yeah.
Might be might be blazing a trail.
That also, when thinking of exploding helicopter numbers, right? Then he is like, he's got one. He's one above all of the other presidents as most exploding helicopter films as a president.
Exactly, he's leading the way.
So something for Trump to think about. Of course, though, it doesn't count right now that he's not president if he's in these movies. I think, right, that's part of it, is that being in office and doing the role.
I don't know. I think I've scarcely thought this through, Matt. So I think
No
we'll just have to see. We'll just have to see what we get, and then I'll take a view as to whether it should be included or not.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing when you think about the president part, because I remember so Jerry Seinfeld does this series called Driving with Comedians in Cars or something like that. And he did an episode where he had Barack Obama. And so, the plan was to get into this car and drive around with Obama talking. And the first thing he learned, when he gets there, I think he probably knew it beforehand, but they kind of, show it as like one of those things that, yeah, he's not leaving the White House grounds. That from a security standpoint, Jerry Seinfeld can't just leave White House grounds with the president. That like they've got to, he can only just drive around the lot and talk there. So I wonder if that's another piece of it, that having a president even appear in a film for a short bit, like the amount of security that's involved is just so immense that like it might even be impossible to film for any amount of time, and that might be part of the issue.
Well, they would have to sort of do it essentially from the Oval Office, wouldn't they? And then that would be the simplest way, just to do it in that environment. It kind of explains why they're there.
Yeah, to be honest, I am kind of surprised with the way that Trump kind of grifted as the president. With the way he kind of tried to make as much money, and it still is trying to make as much money as he possibly can. Off of being president. I'm surprised that he wasn't selling, like someone like a Randall Emmett, like, hey, for $1 million, I guess Randall probably didn't want to spend $1 million, but even like a big budget film, like, hey, $1 million, come shoot inside the Oval Office with me. Like it is, if anybody would have sold that package, it would have been him.
I was just thinking, I mean, in terms of presidents in films, I mean, if you really wanted to stretch what you could include, I mean, would you include, say, like Reagan having been in an action film, and then also what's his name, the one who resigned. Nixon, because people wore their face masks in Point Break.
Exactly, that's a good point. That's actually a great one. Yeah, we get the history of them. Yeah, for sure. And actually, I just was looking up the Under Siege. It actually is archive footage that they used for that of George Bush. So he didn't film for Under Siege. Yeah.
No. But they just used it because the same ship. I think it was the same ship was being the kind of ship that they said that it was taking place on was being decommissioned at the time. So they kind of wove it into the script.
They put it in. So that probably happens more often, right? That you do get these archive footage sequences of people in movies. I mean, I have to think, right, that like those right wing ones, like, so I never saw Amerigeddon. I think you watched it for your podcast, right? Exactly. I don't know if that one had any like footage of Obama, like with ominous music in the background or something like that.
Oh, I don't remember him appearing in it. I mean, I only remember Alex Jones, prophesizing the end of the world. Probably if Obama continued in office, it would be the end of the world.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember. God, I mean, I would have thought the last thing the audience of Amerigeddon would want is to see, a Democratic president in their film.
Well, I thought maybe like the ominous part, but yeah, you're right. Like I would think like that kind of thing would probably do that, but you never know. But yeah, I guess, yeah, I'm trying to think of other moments where you had like sort of like archive footage of presidents in films and them talking about things. I feel like George W. I think they may have used in some like military films, possibly in the early 2000s.
Because he's got such a track record of actually being in the military, hasn't he?
Right,
So.
exactly. Yes, yes. His father did a good job of getting him into the Air National Guard, and so yeah, he didn't do any. I think they so it was funny. They at the time with the Gulf War, they did this thing called like this like I think it was like a playing card set of like all the baddies in Iraq. Like
Yes.
it's Hussein, all that stuff, and there was another version called the Chicken Hawk version that was like all of the people that were pushing for the war here in the U.S. and all of the ways that they got out of serving. And so, of course, George W. Bush, I think, was one of the kings or one of the aces, and how he got out of serving. And Donald Rumsfeld was another big one who got out. But I think like Rush Limbaugh, the way that he got out, I think, was that he had a boil on his ass. And the doctor, I think, so like, I don't know exactly, but somehow he got out of Vietnam through something like that. But so it was like all the deck of cards. It was like all of these major players and how they got out of being in the war. That was the Chicken Hawk deck. So I think I had it. I don't remember if I did or not. I think I bought it though. I think it was sold at like this head shop kind of place in downtown Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where I lived, where like you could buy like your Nag Champra incense and tapestries and things like that.
Wow, you have to root around in your garage, see if you still got it. Sounds like a good collectible item to me.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, it's probably out there somewhere. But yeah, it was like the chicken, whatever they called the one that was like the baddies in Iraq one, whatever they called that one. It was like the same name, but with Chicken Hawk in the name. So, yeah. So, because I never even heard that term before, but I guess that's a term because, like, you've got hawks and doves, right? Like the hawks are the ones that want to fight. The doves are, the ones that want peace. But then there's the chicken hawks are the ones who want war, but have never actually fought in a war before. So they don't really know the destruction that's involved with it.
Yep, you gotta love their enthusiasm for risking other people's lives.
Exactly, for sure. Well, yeah, I guess at this point, anything else on the Courier that we didn't mention?
There's a couple of points I could make, but I don't really. Well, I'm gonna make them anyway.
Yeah,
there's just. As I say, going back to that point I was making about this film, just sort of too many strikes against it. I mean, there were just too many of the moments in this. I mean, there's a bit in this film where this like supposedly hot stuff sniper has been brought in to kind of like help finally kill off Olga Kurylenko, and then there's a moment where he pulls a gun on her and it doesn't have any bullets in. Now, this guy's meant to be like a highly trained killer. I cannot believe that you would, be unaware that a gun you were carrying at the time didn't have any bullets in. I mean, it's just an example of the kind of sort of, dumb, that is a sort of, that then leads into them then having like, a hand-to-hand combat moment. It's a classic kind of trope. Somebody's out of bullets. Okay, throw down the guns. Let's have a fist fight. But, he hasn't discharged that gun previously, like in the moment, he's had time to reload that gun. So like, why on earth he's pulling it with nothing but air in the ammo clip? I mean, it just is too dumb, and it is just another example of the kind of like stupid moments that this film throws up that kind of irritates. But you know what, I don't want to end on a negative. This is another film where Olga Kurylenko spends, the entire movie wearing leather pants. So, you can still enjoy this film.
Exactly. I do want to say on that trope of the running out of bullets. I always have trouble with that because it means that our hero got lucky as opposed to our hero. Like I like the idea of the hero counting the bullets, right? Or like knowing like, okay, based on, I've kind of made myself a target and they've shot at me and wasted their bullets. Now I know they're out of bullets and, that kind of thing. Whereas it's just like, just by luck, the baddie had her and just by luck, he runs out of bullets. And it's like very different from like her, like you said, using the windscreen wiper to stab a guy who was clearly bigger than her, stronger than her. She was completely outmatched by him and she found a way around it. This is luck. It would be like if in that situation we're describing, right? Instead of her, being resourceful, if the baddie just happened to have a heart attack, right? Like he just,
Yeah.
earlier in the film, it shows him eating some bad food, and then the guy's like, hey, this is going to get to you someday, man. No, I'm good. And then while he's beating her up, suddenly, the heart gives out on him, and suddenly, oh, okay. Well, I didn't have to beat that bad guy after all. That trope doesn't work, but yeah, like you said, we'll leave it on a good note with Olga Kurylenko as again, always easy in both films. She's very easy on the eyes, but also it really does a really great job in both. And I think this film is bad not because of her. She's good, and I think the film doesn't work in spite of how good she is.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would, I would agree. And as we're sort of in final thoughts and things, I just wanted to sort of give a shout out to the fact that Olga Kurylenko is in a phase of incredible productivity at the moment. I don't know whether she's got some alimony that she needs to pay or something, but I was looking at her upcoming stuff. She's got 12 films that are in various states of post or pre-production. You've mentioned a big one that's coming up soon, Extraction 2. Looking forward to seeing that. Obviously got that big Marvel movie Thunderbolts, but she's also got a couple of Jesse V. Johnson films that are at various stages of production coming up. Boudica and Chief of Station, and she's got a kind of couple of it looks like riffs on Taken that are coming down the pipe. One called The Paradox Effect, where she's co-starring with Harvey Keitel, and a film called Unify, where she's playing a mother who must find her son while being hunted through the wilds of Scotland by AI-controlled, technology-enhanced humans. So what's not to love about the sound of that plot?
Yeah, it's almost like with that Taken piece, right? That she's almost following the Scott Adkins, right? Where I don't know how many movies Scott Adkins had where he had a child that was kidnapped and the baddies forced him to do things for them, that he didn't want to do. Which, to be honest, I think it's okay if she's following in that role, because it means she's also kind of getting into that level, right? Where people are seeing her as a big enough name that they're putting her in films that they would normally put someone like Scott Adkins in. So yeah, I think that's great. And I also think it's great, the idea of her working with Jesse V. Johnson more. I think he is someone who, when it comes to these direct-to-video movies, I think, not all of his movies are like total hits in the sense of they're not everything's Avengement, I should say, from him. Like Avengement was by one of the best that's come out in a while. But at the very least, there's definitely a floor to his movies that you're not going to get below. And I think that's important in this world where you're going through all these streaming options and you don't know what you're going to get for 90 minutes, that at least, with him, there's going to be a level of quality there that's going to make it, good enough that you're not going to feel like you wanted your 90 minutes back.
Absolutely. I'm actively looking forward to those two films. Largely for that reason. So, I'm kind of I've got, keeping my fingers crossed for those films.
Yeah, and I think he's got a new one out now, One Ranger, that I'm curious to check out. I think he was one of those ones, I think, with the pandemic where he lost some time, or maybe he had some things that were kind of in the hopper that suddenly it seems like he's got an explosion of stuff coming out right now.
Yeah, I wonder how much the sort of, I mean, I know it feels like we're sort of like past the pandemic, but I kind of wonder how much the pandemic is still sort of factoring into some of these sort of spurts that we're sort of seeing from actors.
Yeah. Well, because, I think part of it too is because he shoots in England a lot, and I know the restrictions were different there. But also, yeah, in America, it was LA, the restrictions were heavy, but area like Georgia wasn't so bad. So, obviously, again, Randall Emmett, going back to him, I mean, he was able to pump out a ton of movies because Georgia didn't really care what you did, or Alabama, those states didn't really care how many people got infected with COVID. Just go ahead and do your thing. But yeah, it was kind of more okay, there's that famous scene of Tom Cruise sort of yelling at his crew in England for not wearing masks, which I think was a lot of eyewash. We have this term eyewash. It probably something similar probably for sports in England as well, but it's a term that they use, sports writers in America use for baseball players, where you get that one, the team loses and you get that player who's like throwing things around in the dugout and, yelling and all that stuff. But really, he's the one who's playing the crappiest. But it's like they say it's eyewash in the sense of like he's just doing it to kind of make a scene. But really, it's not really amounting to anything. Just making it seem like he really cares when all he's going to do is just go back and hook up with that Instagram model he talked to during in between innings on his cell phone.
Well, you know what? I think probably making a Randall Emmett movie would be very safe during the COVID era because, if you're an actor, you're probably not actually going to be on set with the other people that you are in the film with. So
Exactly.
you're perfectly safe appearing in his films.
Great point. I didn't even think of that too. Between that part and the fact that there's no restrictions anyway. Yeah, he thrived in the pandemic when everybody else was trying to like put things out there. Well, yeah. Well, I think maybe this is a good place to wrap it up. Will, did you want to give any plugs?
Sure. Well, I run a podcast myself called Exploding Helicopter, and we, as the name suggests, we review films where helicopters explode. And Matt has been a guest many times on the podcast. So if you want to come and check out those particular episodes and maybe explore what we do there, starting there, then that'd be a good starting place for you. Also have our main website where we've got lots of reviews and information about how and where helicopters explode in films. So if you want to check out the website, it's explodinghelicopter.com. We're also on Twitter @ChopperFireball. So yeah, follow me there. I like to interact with people. So yeah, you message me. I'm sure I will find a way of replying back.
Yeah, and one other plug I want to make is to your Letterboxd list of movies with exploding helicopters. I think everybody should go to that list and just see how you fare. I think I'm in like I think I'm around 175 maybe. I think
Matt, I can't believe that.
I know. You think it would be higher? It's a good measure of where you're at in terms of action films. Like, yeah, but I think it's like a really kind of a fun thing. But also, yeah, your Twitter is always fun because it's like whether you're showing like GIFs or short videos of famous exploding helicopters or letting us know when a new movie, right? When you find out about a new film that has an exploding helicopter, it feels like 2023 has been a pretty good year so far. Or am I wrong about that? That it seems like there's been a good number of new exploding helicopter films.
No, I think you're right, Matt. I think there's been quite a few. I haven't totted up the numbers, but I was thinking about that myself only the other day because it does seem like we're up to now 734 films that I've discovered that with an exploding helicopter, and I've really been adding new films onto my list like really frequently this year. So there's been quite a few films that have come out this year that feature exploding helicopters, but also just with people letting me know about older films that have exploding helicopters in. So the list of it just keeps getting longer, and it seems to be getting longer at an accelerating pace.
Yeah, it's funny because I'll watch a movie that has an exploding helicopter and I'll be like, oh, I wonder if Will knows about that one. And I'll go to the Letterboxd page and be like, oh, yep, nope, there it is. It's somebody tagged it at some point. I think the most famous one of those, or the funniest one of those for me, was Dancing It's On. I was like, there's no way Will has that one already yet. And then I checked and it was like, sure enough, there it was on the list. And so that we ended up doing that one on your podcast, which was a lot of fun discussing.
We did indeed, and we had a good fun reviewing that. But I was just looking at sort of films that have come out this year with exploding helicopters. So you got the new Fast X, new Fast and Furious movies. That's got a couple of exploding helicopters in. Extraction 2, which is coming out imminent. That's got an exploding helicopter in. Even things as strange as we've actually had incredibly two sort of romantic comedies / action romantic comedies this year which have exploding helicopters in. So Murder Mystery 2 and the J-Lo movie Shotgun Wedding both had exploding helicopters in. So it's been a very productive year for 2023 for films with exploding helicopters.
Yeah, it's a fascinating. The Fast X one. I know we're starting to wrap up here, but the Fast X one is interesting because the Fast and Furious franchise is one that stayed kind of stayed more like on the ground for the early entries. I think it wasn't until what 6 or 7 that they finally blew up a helicopter.
It was number 7 that they finally blew up a helicopter. Although, as you say, they did stay firmly on the ground for quite a long time, but they've certainly made up for it since by obviously going into space.
Right, exactly. So yeah, when you're blowing up things, you're blowing up satellites in space. You're really pushing it. So yeah, that's a fascinating one. It's been fascinating talking about that one on the sort of these other solo podcasts I've been doing, because it's one of those ones where we sort of take for granted where it is now as a franchise, that it's like, oh yeah, it's the blockbuster. It's like, only blockbusters are doing well here in the US right now this year so far. And it's sort of like, yeah, of course, Fast X is going to be one that did well, whereas like, 14, 15 years ago when they released Fast and Furious, that was not this foregone conclusion, that there was going to be this huge, massive blockbuster action franchise that's like pushing, over $1 billion with each new entry, worldwide, that like, it suddenly turned into this big thing.
Yeah, I'd certainly with the direction that the franchise seemed to be going at one point, you thought that if we did get to number 10 in the Fast and Furious series, it would have none of the original actors involved.
Exactly.
And I mean, I don't know, in that alternate world, who would be appearing in Fast and Furious 10?
Wow, yeah.
Assuming it become like now just a kind of like the Death Race franchise, just something that just kind of existed in the DTV world. Who would be?
Boy, that's a good question. Because I think by the time if Fast and Furious is not a hit, right, and the whole thing goes direct to video, I think Luke Goss probably comes in at some point, right? Because of course he did those Death Race movies. Luke Goss has got to do a few of them, right? I don't think he'd be there for the whole time, but he'd do a few of them. I think it's possible that Vin Diesel, because I think also Fast and Furious revived his career and kept him in big budget. He probably would have come back and done some, because he would have been fully direct to video at that point.
He'd be the through line.
Right, exactly. So we'd be seeing him. I'm trying to think now that we're at this point, like who we would be seeing. I mean, it would be interesting because Kurylenko would be a possible one, right? To like take over to do a movie. I mean, Michelle Rodriguez wouldn't be anywhere near them, right?
No.
She's the only reason why she even came back for them was because they're back in the they're big budget films. I mean, they would be way out of her pay grade there, but I'm trying to think of who else has like in that Vin Diesel mode that that's a direct to video person, I mean would it get to the level of a Johnny Messner? I don't know.
It's a good question to fully and it'd be really good to spend the time fully recasting it as if the film's exactly the same plots,
right?
But you just kind of put different actors in, so with the same like recurring actors, but obviously right. Wouldn't be Helen Mirren, it would be, I don't know, Barbara Crampton or something.
Right, exactly. Yes, yeah. It is a fascinating, because I mean that's one of the things that kind of struck me. When you look back at Fast and Furious, Vin Diesel wanted to make 4 and 5 together. He wanted to make them all at once, and the studio was like, no, we don't think 4 is going to be that. We want to see if 4 is actually a hit first before we let you make number 5. And so it wasn't this foregone conclusion that it was going to be this series that it is. And so I think it could have easily been a direct to video franchise with the name, just tacking the name on and just throwing whoever you can at it. And so, it's interesting. I mean, Daniel Bernhardt, I'm seeing, him come up kind of as we're looking at the Olga Kurylenko, Jesse B. Johnson. I mean, he would have been a great baddie in some of the, or Gary Daniels, would have, maybe Owen Shaw, right, could have been played by Gary Daniels. So
yeah, or get the Grillo in there.
Oh, Grillo would have been fantastic. So Grillo, that's a good point. Grillo probably would have taken over for Vin Diesel in some of these Fast X. Probably by the time we get to Fast X, I could see that being like a direct to Hulu with Grillo in it, and instead of Jason Momoa, then you get maybe Mel Gibson or somebody like that as the baddie.
To be honest, I'm more excited for that as the kind of like Fast and Furious franchise than I am for the one we're getting at the moment.
Yes, no, that's a good point. We didn't really workshop this ahead of time. We could have had a whole segment. I didn't even think we could have had a whole segment on this about like what.
You know what? I think this is a perfect discussion topic for you and the Comeuppance boys.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. With those. Yeah. With those whole. Yes. Our no subject episodes. Yes, for sure. Yes. I didn't even think that's a good idea too.
Put that one on the list.
Absolutely. Yeah, that sounds great. Well, excellent. Well, maybe this is a good place for us to leave it. But I think quickly we'll come back and just say Olga Kurylenko. I think, if anything, I hope this podcast for people that she's not on their radar. I hope this puts her on your radar and you start checking out her films, because she's a really big, I think she's a definite up and comer who's going to hopefully have more really great things coming.
She's got 12 films coming, so
yes.
It's got plenty of opportunities to enter your life.
So hopefully the hit rate will be high enough that she'll definitely have some classics. Well, thank you again, Will, for coming on. This was a really great conversation.
Always a pleasure, Matt. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll talk soon. Bye, everyone.